Well, we are live with the Yes California weekly meeting, Sunday's formal meeting. Apologize for the delay. Massive technical issues. StreamYard just didn't work. And people always call me and go, what happened? I don't know. It felt like not working. So we're back. Let's do the commercial and then we get started. It should be a really good show today because this is like the best week that we've actually had in our conversation in about 3 years. And I'll explain why in about 1 second. In 2018, Yes California started the topic of national divorce. We said that America was not working, it was falling apart, and rather than turn on each other in a violent, aggressive relationship, following the lead of many successful couples, we should get divorced so that we'd have a peaceful relationship with each other. We prioritized that in 2018. I think Valentine's Day, February 2018, we used the idea of peaceful separation, peaceful divorce. Well, we got a big bump also in Calexit right before the election when people thought that Trump may still be president. But it's been kind of a little bit dry since then. You know, there was the fear that Donald Trump would come in and be president and then California have to secede. And you had people like Shepard Smith's TV show and other network TV stations talking about a Calexit possibility. Joe Biden was elected. And the talking about that started to go down a little bit. But 2 weeks ago, we reported here at Yes California that something new had happened. Sarah Silverman, a top comedian, joked about the idea of a national divorce about 2 weeks ago. And we covered that. Now, at that time, people were saying it was a fluke. Nothing's really going to happen. It's just a comedian making jokes. And then some really angry people on the red state side responding. But we said, no, we think it's going to get bigger. Well, we were right. So for the last 2 weeks ago, it started with one comedian making a joke and then some people who were far-right extremists saying that they supported that idea. But then there was even more people on the right saying they supported that idea. And then they threw giant logs on the fire with a new poll showing that 52% of all Trump voters were supportive of secession and 41% for Biden voters. So you already had people talking about national divorce. And then here's a poll coming in that verifies the sentimentality of that. Right after that poll came out, then you started having a lot of conservative newspapers talking about national divorce even more. When those conservative newspapers started re-energizing the topic, what you saw now this week is the other side getting into it. So it was one person on the left, then a bunch on the right, then a survey on the right, and the right started getting really big. Well, now we actually saw the left jump into the game and get really big. So I want to show you a couple links here real quick if I can find the email that I sent. Okay. 1 second, I'll show you guys all of this. One second, it's pulling up. So I'm just going to do a quick, I'm just going to do a quick screen share and then I'll go to comments. Okay, so here's what we're talking about. Here's the Christian Post. I know that's a conservative one, but it's a Christian Post. And they're talking about, is America headed for a national crack up? What they mean is national divorce. And here's that poll that scared them, showing a lot of support amongst Trump voters and Biden voters. Here's another one. This is the New York Intelligencer. No, we can't get a national divorce. There's growing sentiment, and they started attacking it. As we've always talked about, you got to follow the words of the great Mahatma Gandhi. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. So this is fighting. No, we can't get a national divorce. Stop talking about it. Yeah, it's there, but here's how it's all wrong and bad. Here's sorry, national split won't work. That's in the New York Post. Here's Politico, a national divorce. Oh, and here's why they got it wrong. And then New York Post going, yeah, national divorce is in the news, but it won't work. American Spectator, that's a conservative one. You want a national divorce? Oh, it's not going to work. Intelligence or New York, kind of like middle of the road, somewhat left. No, you can't get a national divorce. And here's another one. That's the Christian Post. And then here's Raw Story, which is a super lefty one. This is already talking about how the right has already seceded. And then we have The Week, which is another lefty international one, talking about national divorce and how it's implausible. So when you have multiple publications from around America who are progressive and they're talking about national divorce and they're attacking the idea, it means the idea is here and it's being discussed. So national divorce is trending. People are interested in it. It's not going away. It's picked up as like a fluke 2 weeks ago. We said this is going to expand because they promised unity and America coming back together. That never came to fruition or execution or exemplification here in any sort of sense. And so, Biden was supposed to fix all the problems of Trump and he didn't. And we were pointing out months ago how America was not coming back together. Nobody wanted to hear that. Now they're finally admitting it because there was a poll showing support for secession. There was a lot of discussion about national divorce, and there's another poll showing support for secession. So Adam Kokesh and then the rabbi, you guys are not in California. What do you think? Is this topic getting bigger? Because it was one comedian and a few people who were pissed off, and now it's all sorts of liberal magazines and conservative magazines 2 weeks later talking about it. Adam, is it getting bigger? Is this a fluke, flash in the pan, or what's going on? Your opinion.
No, it's absolutely getting bigger. I am partly here because I am a true believer in decentralization as the future for humanity and for America and for politics in general. And obviously that's a important theme with blockchain and the internet and all of that. But what we're seeing now is just the conversation kind of catching up with the sentiment. I don't believe that there is going to be like Sarah Silverman as the trigger that gets the snowball rolling down the hill. But what's important is seeing that the hill is there and the roll down it is inevitable. And it's just a matter of time before people realize that centralized coercive governments, people being forced into systems that don't represent them, is not a good idea and not necessary. And we're going to get past this whole paradigm. So I'm excited that the conversation is heating up. I don't know what the opportunity is here. And that's what I'm excited about. And I'm glad that you are exploring that and that we have an opportunity. Perhaps this would be an opportunity for an important resolution from Yes, California.
Right, because you're pursuing the Gardenia sovereignty. And so you also are in the game with some skin about how a national divorce may go. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it's just something that I'm working on as a model of creating a microstate or a micronation on privately owned land, being able to just declare your independence and say, we are sovereign. We have all. How did the United States get its authority? Because they declared sovereignty from Britain and said, all right, we're our own country now. And they had to fight our forefathers and all that, had to fight a war to get that respected. But I think in this day and age, we have such a great expectation of peace and harmony and cooperation that if people at the state level or the county level or the homestead level, as we're at here, say, you know what, we're our own country now, we're sovereign, we're going to claim it. I don't think you're going to see the ability of the centralists to convince enforcers, trigger pullers, to go and stop that from happening.
That's interesting. That's interesting because that was the same conversation. We did an interview with the New Hampshire Mike Sylvia. He was the politician in New Hampshire that actually has been in the news for proposing secession for New Hampshire, like through the actual process. And what was great was we at Yes California did an hour-long interview with him, and no one else is interviewing this guy. So he's in the news, an actual elected official, used the proper government procedures to propose that his government secede. That hasn't been done since like 1861. He got a little blurb in the news. Nobody's called him to go, how did you do that, or walk this through? So, and I'm like, nobody, just out of curiosity, like the New York Times or LA Times, just that giggles, like, hey, you're proposing secession. Everybody's talking about national divorce at the same time. You are the only elected official out of 50 states to do this. Just out of media in curiosity. When they cover, he was like, no one's calling. Oh, okay, that's kind of weird. Because you'd think if it was real news, you're talking about national divorce, sitting politician actually proposes this the legal way. Mike's a reasonably intelligent guy. Just out of curiosity, people are talking about this. This is happening. Let's cover it. Zero media coverage. That's why he was willing to do an interview with us. That's why he's willing to talk for a long time. He's like, no one's going into this. I find that interesting. We've gotten pretty good at recognizing where there should be legitimate media coverage, and we see absolutely none. We see what we call intelligent design of an unseen hand. That's intentional. They don't want people to know about this. It's trending, and they're worried, and they're scared. And that's why you have half of these articles saying national divorce is stupid, and it'll fall apart, and no, you can't have it. And that's why they won't even cover Sylvia, an elected official, doing this the right way. Not seeing us on YouTube. That Mike, good point. Silent Mike was pointing out we're not on YouTube. I had problems getting the link to work today. So I had to get a new setup computer, go to a different server, re-hook it up in order to get things going, because we were 10 minutes behind. I just clicked my own channel since that works. Some of the other channels I don't directly own, and so sometimes there are some issues with being able to distribute to them. So we had technical issues this morning. I was on the computer for 40 minutes before this meeting thinking it would work out, and it didn't. And that's my mistake, and I take full responsibility. That's my screw up. I should have got the link done yesterday, and I didn't because I was talking about national divorce. Hey, we have a new person here.
Hello.
Rachel Goldsmith. Hey, how are you doing?
Hi, guys.
Let's go right to it.
Well.
Rabbi, can you come on screen and introduce us?
Hi, everybody. This is Rachel Goldsmith from Free State Project and running Liberty Forum this year for New Hampshire. And thank God she's with us. That's awesome.
Rachel, thank you for being here. I want to apologize to you. I'm sincerely sorry. We normally start at 11 sharp. We had some technical issues. Normally that never happens. It happened this day. I did my best to work on it, and I personally apologize. This is not the look that we like for Yes California, and I'm very apologetic to you.
That's okay. I appreciate the apology, and things happen.
So tell us
I'm glad
about
that we could connect.
Tell us about the project. What's going on? What's happening? What are you part of? Why is it great?
So the Free State Project is a movement of liberty lovers to kind of migrate to New Hampshire, concentrate our efforts, and make real change happen within a state whose motto is already live free or die. Now, the concept behind the Free State Project was that, you don't want to be the first person who moves someplace and try to start from scratch. You want to make sure that there are going to be other people who come with you. So the FSP kind of came up with this idea. Jason Sorens, who's a
yes, the professor on
PhD in econ, came up with this idea in 2001 to get 20,000 people to kind of sign an agreement and say, let's all move to the same place. And so they did. They decided on New Hampshire, and it's been 5 years since we triggered the move, essentially telling people, okay, now we're going to all go to New Hampshire. And as of now, we've had hundreds of people elected openly as Free Staters, and some of them are just, liberty lovers, liberty leaning Republicans or Libertarians or Democrats even. But there's, a Freedom Caucus that makes up about a quarter of the state rep house. And so it's really working, both politically and economically and socially. We have a huge community, and it's great. I love it here.
I'm going to show them a little bit about Jason Sorens. So here's Jason Sorens. He's a professor. He's written some of the best articles on secession and on the legality of secession. And he also, here he is, he started the Free State Project. So if you type in Free State Project or Jason Sorens professor, you can see that and you can hear a little bit about what Rachel's talking about. So Rachel, well, tell us about the Liberty Fest. What's the name?
Liberty Forum is a kind of conference style event that we're hosting March 4th through 6th. And it's kind of in contrast to Pork Fest, or the Porcupine Freedom Festival, which you may have heard of,
yep.
Which is a summertime event, and it's much, more agora oriented. Liberty Forum is really intended for people who want to work within the system to make things change. So like Mike Sylvia, for example, I know you guys had him on earlier.
Yes, ma'am.
He's been a state rep for, I'm not sure, half a decade now, I think it is. And he put in a bill to have New Hampshire secede from the Union. So this is a real bill that the State House is going to have to really vote on and really talk about. And so the kind of work that Liberty Forum is going to be talking about, and we're going to be doing discussions and workshops with policy experts and subject matter experts from all over the country and from New Hampshire as well, is kind of how do we export this process and this attitude, and then also how do we learn from people who are out of New Hampshire to do what is working in other states and make sure that that we use best practices, whether it be in education freedom or medical freedom or self-defense, these kinds of things.
Do we have 1 minute for me to ask you an existential question?
Sure.
So we asked Mike Sylvia. We did an interview with him, and we were very proud to do that, but a little bit shocked because he's in the news. There's 50 states. The last time someone has actually walked through a secession platform as an official in the government system was 1861 with South Carolina. Now you could say Texas did that a little bit, but really it was people lobbying their party to do it. This was an elected official using the proper gears to actually propose secession for New Hampshire. Somebody using the government structure to that level of formality hasn't happened since South Carolina. And yet when I talk to Mike Sylvia, I go, are you getting interviews? No. Is people calling? No. Why is it, yes, California is the only group calling this guy and asking for detailed information on what he's doing when it's historically significant and the topic of national divorce is trending? Why do you think that is? Why aren't other people interviewing him? How come we're the only ones?
Yeah, people right now, especially with the culture divide that we have in this country, are almost afraid of what that conversation is going to lead to. Because, I see national divorce trending on social media a lot. I also see people just generally saying that they don't want to live in the same place as, people who are afraid. Just so many people are afraid. And I think the mainstream media is afraid. And I think that generally speaking, it's just a conversation that is going to result in kind of a hard conversation for a lot of people about what it is that we're going to do next.
Do you think the topic of national divorce is just a fluke? It'll calm down in a few days and go away? Or is this where we're going and that there's a trend here that should not be ignored?
I honestly don't see how we can resolve some of the key differences. I don't know if you saw, but the Southwest Sick Out that is happening right now in Jacksonville in South Carolina. So essentially, for workers, because they're putting in a vaccine mandate, have all called out sick. And Southwest had to cancel hundreds of flights. And this is the kind of thing that it's like, I don't really know how to resolve this, because people on one side really, really firmly, I mean, they're scared. They really firmly believe that getting the vaccine to 100% is going to solve everything. And then there's people on the other side who are probably in some ways equally scared, who don't want to take medicine because they're not sick, and are, afraid of myocarditis and some real genuine issues, who are not high risk of COVID, who don't want to take that and don't want to be part of the mandates. And I'm not sure how those two things resolve. I mean, maybe in 20 or 30 years, we find out what the truth is, but not tomorrow.
And so you think that we have to be very careful how we talk about that here, because YouTube is a little bit nutty. So I appreciate the caution. But there's such a divide on how people view how to deal with the pandemic. And then we already came from the national divide of Trump voters versus non-Trump voters. And so it seems like we constantly are jumping from, you're the enemy and everything, to, oh, here's another issue, and you're immediately partitioned into the enemy. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel went on TV and wished death upon a couple 100 million people. So people go, oh, he was joking and it's a joke. But no, he said, if you don't have the vaccine, you go to the hospital, die. That's 100 million people he wished death on. So I don't want to get into a vaccine debate, but wow, when you have Americans saying, I hope 100 million other Americans drop dead, I think that's kind of bad. I mean, is that just a fluke? Am I getting this wrong? Or do you think this is kind of a sign of, I'm sorry, you pressed the Rubicon, you blew up the bridge, there's no walking back now? Am I getting this wrong?
So to me, I think what we're really seeing is the acceleration of a trend that was already in existence. Political migration is the highest that it's been in the history of humanity, because people are able to step away from, because we have the ability at this point really to like make a day trip out of 100-mile space. Like if you go 100 miles from your family, it's not really that bad. Whereas 100 years ago, that would have been something that you couldn't do. So people are able to pick and choose where they live, and retain kind of relationships with their families because of the communication channels that we have, and maybe work remotely, and all of these things. So we've had this kind of increase in political migration, which makes breaking up the United States a much more viable possibility.
You don't think that this has to be bad? Like, because there's some people going, oh, well, last time there was a split, it was the Civil War. And I go, yeah, but that was 150 years ago, without computers, without integrated economies, without the concept of international trade. Why can't we have a peaceful divorce? Like, why does it have to be where we would separate and then we turn on each other with guns and stop trading with each other? And I'm like, everyone in the world trades with each other, right? Like, even the economies they're trying to isolate, Iran, North Korea, they still want to trade. The reason Iran and North Korea don't get to trade is because everybody else says you don't get to, not because they themselves, nobody here is for not international trade. So why would a bunch of English-speaking people with roads that connect to each other turn on each other instead of saying, look, why don't we just have international trade? My favorite example is Canada. The Canadians do not want to be Americans. But guess who has the highest rate of boys and girls dating each other? Canadians and Americans. But they don't want to be Americans. And Canadians, America. So why does it have to be bad? How come we can't have a peaceful divorce and get along and still have international trade? Why do we immediately have to go to the machinations of, guys marching in line and cannonballs? Like, why can't we recognize that we have the thing called the international integrated economy, and it's the year 2020, not 1865?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably point to the propaganda distributed by the federal government first and foremost, and say, this massive creature known as the U.S. government essentially is the biggest barrier, because it's just Newton's laws of physics. Like, once something starts growing, it's not going to stop, and the U.S. government does not want to stop growing. It does not want to stop taking in additional funds. It does not want to stop providing services. And I think most of the people in the federal government probably think that they're doing good for the world, and maybe they are able to kind of turn a blind eye to the problems that come with top-down bureaucracy, and they don't necessarily believe in the free market and agora, whatever. And so all of those people, the federal government employs something like 5%, I think it is, of American adults. Like, that's a huge number, and all of those people are going to rely on that beast to suckle.
Yeah, but so I just find it interesting. Yeah.
So I don't know. But that's the kind of conversation that I think, is not unusual or is not like odd to have in New Hampshire. And maybe that's why Mike was more comfortable putting forth a bill like this, because I think when you are a state rep, you are beholden to your constituents. And I don't think that Mike's constituents are going to vote him out because he's putting something like this forward. Whereas in a lot of places, this is going to be like a big X on it would be a big X on him in some other parts of the country, like in New York or in Massachusetts or Vermont or probably in California.
I find it interesting.
The state reps here get to actually be principled and get to actually like do Liberty thing.
Is that your answer, or is that what you got from Mike?
That's just my answer.
So you have not spoken with Mike Sylvia about this particular
not about this particular issue. I mean, he and I have spoken in the past, but
okay.
We have an email thread going now.
Both of you have the exact same response. So
is that right?
Yeah, you can watch the interview we did with him. I'll post it up, but it's literally the same thing. So what he said was the sentiment for divorce is out there. Unfortunately, a lot of politicians, you have to get so much money and so many connections before you can even get up there. In New Hampshire, you have one of the best democratic levels of interaction. So you have like the lowest number of people per representative, and it's an easy chance to actually get an actual representative, a farmer in the community, to run for office and not be blocked out by money and politics. And he said, it's simply because I am from the people that I did this. This is what the people want. And I wasn't blocked by the politics that happens elsewhere. And New Hampshire actually has a really good ratio or ability for people to have what they want actually get proposed. And so what you're seeing is the will of the people actually being proposed. And that's why you don't see it in other states, is because people running can't even get the money and the accolades and everything it takes. And in New Hampshire, you have functional democracy. And that's why. That's what he said. How do you feel about that?
I mean, it's absolutely the case. State reps in New Hampshire get paid $100 a year. That's it. That's as much as you make. So like, you don't go into it because you want to make money. You go into it because you really believe in the process and making a difference and making sure that our voices are being heard. So there are other perks that go along with it, like you get a parking pass at the State House big perks.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's not the kind of thing that there's no revolving door here where there would be in other places. It's just not how it works. And there's, I think, a real culture as well of respect for, but also, realizing that our representatives are people too, and we know where they live. And that's the kind of thing that, they are beholden to us. So rebuild or reopen New Hampshire has a pretty big following here. And actually, I think today they went to Governor Sununu's house and they had signs and they honked their horns and they said, like, so right now, actually, this is like kind of a little context. New Hampshire is deciding, and the Executive Council is deciding whether or not to take a $27 million grant from the federal government to increase vaccine awareness. And so the strings that would be attached with this are that if the federal government ever wants to put people, increase the amount of stick as opposed to the carrot associated with like whether or not you take the vaccine or you choose not to. So if the federal government ever changes how much stick there is, the string associated with this $27 million grant would be that New Hampshire has to comply. And so that's part of the conversation that the Executive Council is having. And the meeting on the by the Executive Council to make a decision on yes or no to this grant has had to be rescheduled. I think it's 3 or 4 times now, because people show up and they say, this is not what we want. This is not how the New Hampshire voters and taxpayers and constituents want to have our government be representing us. And so there's like just a lot of actual, we're much more close, I suppose, than in some places. New Hampshire state reps are not like this high and mighty body. We know who they are, we know where they live, and that we're friends with a lot of them.
Yeah, that's what Mike Sylvia said, was that you have only a couple thousand people per representative. They're in the community. It takes very little money to run, and so real people can run, and they're not blocked out of the system. And one of the things I always found weird was secession was supported by 32% of Californians, and yet no politician ran on that. And then when you look at Texas, it was like 42%, and no politician ran on that. They couldn't get any politician in Texas to back it up. I think they had to get the Republican Party chair, who's not actually an elected official. And all he did was say that he was open to it. So you have a state where 40% of the population supports secession, but not one politician will run on it. You have another place called California where 32% support it and not one will run on it. And then you have New Hampshire, and someone actually runs on it. And we're going, if there's these states where there's lots of people supporting it, and we live in a free, fair democracy with the will of whatever, how come we don't have no politicians running on it and y'all do? Unless what you and Mike are saying is true. There are people who do want to run. There are politicians who would pursue this, and the system blocks them like a wall built by Trump, preventing them from even doing it. And so it looks like there's not a lot of support for secession in Texas and California, but that is rigged. You're not even allowing the representatives of the people to speak. What do you feel about that theory?
I mean, I have to say that I think that's a failure of the dual party system. And if there was something like ranked choice voting or approval voting, that some of these issues would be a lot different. I know that Maine, for example, has a ballot where like people can put up a bill themselves. I prefer New Hampshire's approach, which is that like the actual state reps need to put the bills together. But I do think that, the two-party system is the biggest issue. And if we could resolve something like that, then we'd be able to see a lot of forward motion on, problems that, New Hampshire, for example, like you don't go to jail for marijuana anymore, but it's not fully legal. It's not recreational marijuana. It's not fully available. And that's the kind of thing that, like, because of the two-party system and because of police unions and because of all these other issues, we see that kind of sticking backwards.
Rabbi, you got thoughts, opinions? Jump on in, Rabbi.
Yeah, I just had a thought. It's almost a circular problem. The reason that people are so against secession when they're in public office is because everybody in public office has their eye on making it into the federal government. The reason Christian Nuno in New Hampshire is the way he is because he doesn't want to be in New Hampshire. He wants to be a senator in Washington. So in that sense, it's circular. If your goal is to be national government, you're never going to be pro-secession. If there were no national government, you'd be very happy to fight for the rights of your states.
That's clever.
Yeah, I could see that to be true.
Well, we said that also out here in California, like, why, so Calexit got really big in 2017, and then our governor goes on TV and says, I'm not for secession. And we're like, why would you say that when 47.5% of the population is open to this discussion? Well, and then 2 months later, articles come out about Newsom, the next Democratic nominee for prez. They're like, oh, okay. You're not happy being governor. You want to be president, and you think you can be president, so you're going to say whatever America wants to hear when your own people in California want something maybe slightly different. So it's the lure of the federal government. We saw it with Kamala Harris. She was one person, and then she went to work for the federal government and became some horrible monster that's hated by most Californians now. So how do you feel about that, Rachel, with the idea that, you know, they're not batting for our team. They're worried about their career highlights, and they're going to say whatever they need to some Leviathan miles away from us when they're not really speaking for us. Is that true? Is that false? How do you feel about that?
I gotta say, I think for the most part, anybody who is a politician for long enough becomes, either they start out being a sociopath and it slowly is uncovered that that's the case, or you're forced to become one because you have to make decisions that dehumanize the constituents around you. You know, everybody turns into a number. So I think the higher you get, the more of a sociopath you must be. And I don't know what the cause or an effect is. I don't know what order it goes in, but I definitely think every president that we've ever had is a sociopath.
Well, then that backs up that secession would be the answer. So if New Hampshire's independent, you can't be thinking about, I'm going to go run for Senate in the feds. It's not an option. You're stuck in New Hampshire, so you better prioritize the people there and what they want, because that's your entire career.
I mean, New Hampshire is, I think, a great example of how peaceful secession could actually work. I mean, if it were up to me, I'd bring Maine along with us, just so we're a nice northern clump. And I'd love to get all that coastline on Maine. But otherwise, you know, we could be theoretically self-sufficient if we had to. You know, we have fresh water, we have we have a decent growing season. We have a decent tech community already. So I don't think that would be too much of a barrier. But, you know, a lot of people in New Hampshire, and I think also up in this New England area, are just generally have an attitude of self-sufficiency and have an attitude of being comfortable, you know, doing their own thing and leaving other people alone. And if that's the case, then, you know, missing out on the rest of the U.S., I don't think would break anybody's heart.
So do you think Americans are ready for a peaceful vote? One of the issues we've had here was we said Americans are ready to divorce each other and they will vote for it. And then we have the newspaper say, no, you'll never get the votes to let a state go. And if they hate you, they'd never agree on something. And we said, no, that's not right. A lot of red states don't like California. They would agree to let us go because it would result in peace. Do you think people can get that things are going to get worse and maybe we should just peacefully vote to let each other leave before it gets worse?
It does seem like it's one of those things that every election cycle, there's at least some group of celebrities that claim they're going to move to Canada. So I yeah. Right? Yeah. I feel like there's definitely room for that idea to foster, and I don't think we're too far away from it. But at the same time, I think, you know, people are very uncomfortable with the idea. I mean, we've been taught from a very young age that nationalism is a positive.
Right. Hitler and all that. Yeah.
And that's actually one of the things that I love about New Hampshire as well, is my whole community, right? I mean, there's 5,000 or 10,000 free staters here, and a lot of them have families, and a lot of them are homeschooling or choosing alternative forms of schooling. And it very rarely, although not infrequently, but it does very rarely come along with this worship of the state. And you know, I have a decent number of friends who are doing homeschooling, and so are kind of teaching their kids about the founding of America and some of the principles that are associated with that. But for the most part, there's a lot of critical thinking that goes towards the rest, the history of America. And so I never have to really have the conversation with my kids about, is America great? Why isn't it great? How could it be better? That conversation is never like, yeah, we need to go to war to prove how great we are. That conversation is never going to be like, yeah, we have to, wear the stars and stripes because people bleed and die for America. That's not really how it goes. But we get to have this very critical conversation without being negative necessarily, without, saying that we don't want America to ever have existed, but at least saying, we're not teaching our kids like indoctrination, I guess, is kind of a key difference. And so being part of this community of independent-minded people who are teaching their kids to be independent and to think critically has been really an incredible experience for me.
So you're already pursuing what we would call the Great Epiphany. As we projected here in Calexit, we were saying, California will secede when the people mentally have already broken off. And maybe the laws are in place, and maybe this is that, and maybe you wear this and that T-shirt, but mentally you already view yourself as independent, and you act that way, and you just have this epiphany of we're separate, and no one can stop that mental catalyzing. It's impossible. We saw it with Hong Kong. We saw it with Catalonia. The government can attempt to repress, but that doesn't change the hearts and minds of millions of people to go, oh, we are a people and we are different. I think that's what you're getting at, is that gradually the people in that state are evolving into something where they view themselves as independent in some sort of body. Is that fair?
I think it's a generational thing. I think when you get kids out of public school, then you can start seeing more and more people who think independently and who are not afraid of independence.
I gotta say, hats off. I see you're a mom. That's awesome. Did being a mom do anything to change your thinking about this? Because I talk to moms and they're like, oh, secession, that's scary. But when I'm talking to you, it seems like you being a mom helped move you towards the way you're thinking. Am I getting this wrong? Correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, I would say specifically within the reaction to COVID and seeing some of my friends from, my youth who are also kind of my peers, might also have young kids, and how they're kind of dealing with it, and how they have really accepted the fact that their kids are going to be basically in isolation and growing up in isolation. Just the difference in having a community here has really changed whether or not I would accept what's happening in the rest of the country. So I guess what I mean is I have been extraordinarily fortunate to have a bubble, a really big bubble of like-minded community members and friends and family who are all at the same phase in their family life as I am, and as me and Jeremy are. So it's definitely changed whether or not I think I would have accepted this kind of conversation before, and whether or not the federal government is the right answer for some of the questions that it seems to think that it is the answer to.
I just find that interesting because I've had a lot of colleagues, and I knew them when they were in activism, and then they had a kid, and it's still the same person, but it seems to really catalyze, really what's important to you and what kind of future, and it gets very real. And I just see you talking about the future, and I'm just wondering how much, because after the last election, same thing that you had said, it gets worse each election, right? So my brother isn't into politics, never had anything to do with it, and after this last election, he called me almost in a panic going, what the hell am I supposed to tell my daughter? when she starts voting, because this is so jacked up. For somebody not in the game to jump in and go, wow, it's so screwed up, I don't even know what to do for my kid. I call it the parent effect. Oh my God, this isn't a game. My child is going to have to deal with this. How do we fix this? Do you think that's a catalyst for people, for adults? Maybe
I think, yeah, like now that I feel responsible for these lives, not only in like raising them and keeping them safe and teaching them things, but also for like, if things really hit the fan, if there really is the kind of like demolition of the society as we see it now, like what are we going to do, and do we have a bug out plan, and how are we prepared? And it's funny because we have a friend who lives in Boston, and they are very left leaning, and they came up and asked us to take them on a shoot because they want to buy a gun in case things really hit the fan. And so it's like, from the really the culturally the left side, they're quite woke. From that side, they are very afraid of what's going to happen next, and they want to be prepared finally. And I'm like, finally, like, get on my page of like, things are going to fall apart very soon, and you need to be prepared. You need to be ready. And so it's been kind of an interesting experience watching them like go from, woke, there's this culture war and people are being oppressed, to like seeing the actual economic fallout that's impending, and how they need to manage their lives and their families' lives, and how to keep their kids safe in case something like that does happen.
I want to bring in Adam Kokesh.
I'd really like to.
I'm sorry. No, please go, Rachel. Please.
I think that there's like this really something behind writing like a children's book for apps and putting together okay, this
I'm sorry, that got really digitized. If you could say that one more time, it got very broken apart. Sorry. Oh, okay, we lost her. Adam, I wanted to ask you, you're also a parent or soon to be parent. You live in another part of America. Did being a parent affect you? And, what do you think about what you heard from another person on the other side of the country?
Well, I think you're jumping ahead on my timeline a little bit. Maybe.
I'm okay. My bad.
So for me, it's more, I don't want to have kids until I feel good about having created a world that's safe for them. And part of that is, I mean, most people don't have sort of the high standard that I do for that, but being able to create that space here in an off-grid homestead is how I've, chosen a path for that. And I think the Free State Project represents another great path for that.
What do you think about the idea that things are getting worse and people are just noticing it more? And maybe it was, just a kind of an accolade or a daydream or something to think about when they were an individual. But as you're approaching, like, taking care of a future life, it gets real. And then that forces them to have to start thinking seriously about how they're going to provide for the future. And that maybe is the only reason they start coming to where we're at, where it ain't working very well. And you're going to need to do something to make sure that you have stability in the long-term future.
Well, let me break down one part of that question. You said things are getting worse. And if you step back a little bit and take a look at human history, you go, wow, things are getting better. Infant mortality, quality of life, food, energy, shelter, clothing, access to all of these basic standards of quality of life are still improving. I would say technology, data, at this point is another such commodity of essential services for quality of human life. And while there's, a major part of the planet that's unplugged from the internet, which is, hopefully we're going to be getting to full access within a generation here. I think that's an incredible way that we are all being brought together. So when you say things are getting worse, that the general trend of things getting better and actually accelerating that is still continuing. But when you say things are getting worse, I think it's better to differentiate when we say what things are getting worse.
Yeah.
Because while human productivity and potential is exponential, literally exponential, over the course of human history, yes, it's a freaking hockey stick. Look at Moore's law, computing power, all of these quality of life metrics. Eventually, life expectancy will be on the same curve, and you'll see that things are really taking off. But for the average human being on Earth, our experience is still kind of linear, at least a lot closer to linear than the overall progress and capacity of humanity would suggest. And so what's getting worse is how badly we're being exploited, how much of our productive capacity is being stolen from us. And while I am, a massive proponent, believer in localization, decentralization, there is a bigger problem of the concentrations of wealth and power that drive this system, and that might be what's really being hidden from us. So as much as we're about to have this political revolution of decentralization over the next generation or two, there's maybe a longer 100-year struggle of redistributing ill-gotten gains, wealth that has been taken from people by governments through corporatism, and reallocating that wealth through peaceful means. I hope we crash the dollar with decentralized currency, and that is going to be the primary thing that gets us to a much more level playing field economically, and a healthy economy for everyone, where everyone has the ability to enjoy the fruits of technology and our increased productive capacity. So when you say things are getting worse, there's one other thing about this. It's not just the divergence of those curves and that what is being stolen from us is bigger than ever before, but that it's getting harder. And so there's a sort of destabilization of the system right now under COVID, where they really have to, and again, respectful of your self-censorship for YouTube purposes.
Thank you. I'm sorry. You don't know how many people I'm sorry.
I heard. Don't worry.
I'm fine. I know it's silly.
It's dumb. It's really dumb. But
it is.
You have chosen with this channel to walk this line for COVID. So with respect to that, I will say, we're just pointing out some mainstream headlines about COVID, looking at what's happening in Australia, looking at what's happening in France and Germany with protests, and the UK, and a number of places around the world. It seems that the level of censorship itself, the restrictions on the expression of the will of the people is getting more and more intense. In that sense, things are getting worse. I see that overall as like a positive destabilization. Those in power are losing grip, and that's kind of our opportunity to have this localization revolution.
I agree with everything you said. Generally, things are getting better, but there is this power grip that seems to be getting worse, and that's fair. So quality of life in general is getting better for everybody, but our freedoms are seeming to be lost. I remember when you could have a difference of opinion and it was okay. Now it's not. The education quality for the average student in America has dropped over the last 20 years. So is their ability to understand how to make their own money. So is their ability to own their own business. So yeah, quality of life is up, but all these things that seem to be pivotal to being independent in the society and having some sort of connection to the ancient Greeks is dissipating in real time. I should have been more detailed. You're right. And that's why I support independence. And I think localization is the answer. If Gardenia was independent, you wouldn't have politicians saying things that don't make sense for your community because they're trying to get for a federal office. You wouldn't be so blasé about the kids of Gardenia having a quality education because you relied on them, right, to run things in your community. And we're losing all that. I think.
Well, I think it's even more fundamental than that, Marcus. And for
Tell
me,
me.
as a libertarian, specifically, I'm a voluntarist, and I believe that is the ethical core of libertarianism and of ethics itself. The ideal that human relationships should be voluntary, free of force, fraud, and coercion. And therefore, if you're going to have something called government, it better be consensual. And that means everybody has to have the right to opt out, to leave with their property. That might mean land as well. And the threat, having the option of choosing to opt out of any particular political system that you're in means that it must be consensual. It means that they can't just ride roughshod over whatever you want because it's in the interest of the central authorities, because you could opt out at any time. And to me, that's the ultimate definition of a free society. It's not, do we have government? Do we not have government? Do we have this form of government or that form of government? I don't really care. Let every community have their own. To the extent that people want centralization of certain things, let them have it. But it must be consensual. And that's the real revolution that decentralization is sort of the political trigger to, is a greater human paradigm shift to applying ethics to politics.
I got to ask you, because we had Rachel here from New Hampshire, and the rabbi's here from New York, and you're from Arizona, and the rest of us are largely in Cali. So coming from an Arizona perspective, but also, having served abroad, having, traveled across the USA, is the topic of national divorce only going to grow? Have we hit some pivotal point where it's matured and now the baby will continue to walk on its own? Or is this just a fluke and it's going to go away and it means really nothing? What do you think? Why are we talking about this now? Does it mean something? Or is it, just hype? We already got Rachel's opinion. I'd really like to get yours, coming from the other side of America.
Yeah, this suggests a much deeper question. But, as to, do we want as a species, are we so psychologically unhealthy and deficient in the current age that we must cling to sentimentality and nationalism and collective identities rather than being healthy enough to stand, at least psychologically, as individuals who can be respected in communities where everybody's expectation of being treated ethically is respected? And when you ask, the question that way, I think about those larger historical trends that we are becoming. Well, there's 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, of course, in a lot of these larger historical trends. And a lot of people are at the point, look, everybody's crazy in America. Everybody's on pharmaceuticals. Everybody's diagnosed with some personality disorder. I would argue that we are still healthier than ever mentally as a species overall, despite some steps back in America that are relatively significant, certainly related to big pharma and antidepressants and all sorts of psychoactive pharmaceuticals. But the general trend is more that we are becoming more aware of mental health deficiencies and becoming more capable of being mentally healthy. And it is only fear and uncertainty. And again, with the trend to greater productivity, our material security is such that we need not huddle together in tribes under a chief who's going to say, make war with a neighboring tribe because it makes him as an individual more powerful. Instead, we are going to be able to trade directly and interface with every other human being in respect for their individual humanity, and with that relationship goal of all human relationships being free of fraud, force, and coercion.
I hope so. And I just don't feel it's a coincidence that you got started in your movement, and originally it was anti-war, and then you came down to the whole thing isn't working and maybe need independence. And then I wrote a book a decade ago about how America isn't working, and I wasn't for secession when I initially came to that opinion. So it's like I keep seeing people who are getting into this catalyzed by whatever happens, and they always go to the same conclusion. We got to start localizing. We got to start making it peacefully into smaller units. It's just unmanageable, and we're not going to get everybody to be on the same team. So why don't we agree to separate teams? And then do that where we agree to that instead of fighting each other into separate camps. I think we're going to go to separate camps. It's how do we get there? Yelling and screaming and ripping each other's stuff apart, or going, look, let's just be adults here and stop, because I'm going to do stuff I shouldn't do, and you're going to say some things you shouldn't say. So let's be adults here and take care of the kids and just agree to divorce.
I just say I love the attitude and feeling, and I'm right there with it. I just can't help but notice how much that relies on an assumption of maturity from, you know, the counterpart, right? Those who are absolutely opposed to independence. Assuming that they're mature enough to realize that kicking and screaming and throwing a tantrum is for babies, and that we're not babies, we're grown adults talking about civics and policy. Well, you know, it would be nice. I think if there is enough maturity in the counter, then yeah, you know, people might finally wake up and realize, wow, so me as a non-Californian, non-Biden worshipping yada yada yahoo, I will be better off if California goes their own way, both financially and socially. You mean the policies that I want will no longer be called wrong? The people who I want to represent me will be more likely to get into office? Now again, this is under the great assumption of massive amounts of maturity. I welcome anyone on the counter side who's got the maturity to, you know, really look at this without kicking and screaming and throwing a tantrum. It's just that over the last, 8 years now that we've been doing this, more often than not, it turns into attempts at gotcha, right? Oh, well, you can't do that because the United States military is bigger and better, and they could just come in and take you. Or China could come and nuke you and try and take over California so they can have front row seats at, you know, World War III with America, right? These quite preposterous hypotheticals. They are attempts at gotchas.
Yeah.
I'd like to address the challenge of maturity, if I may, Marcus.
Yeah, let's get a convo going. Adam, what do you say to Jason? Jason's smart. You're smart.
Yeah. It's not just it's just to answer the challenge that he raises, because I think I would recognize that America is in a point of a sort of maturity crisis. That's fun analysis as a way of looking at the sort of cultural moment that we're in, and people being dominated by fear and everything going on with COVID. There's a lot of just immature crap going on, a lot of bad behavior, and it's you know, maybe a step backwards in, again, the human historical evolutionary process, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, where we're getting a lot more mature over time. I mean, compared to the state of nature where, you know, everybody's a hunter-gatherer, or, you know, trying to kill or be killed, and it's a much more violent society. We are way more mature. Now, whether we're mature enough to peacefully decentralize is another question, but I would suggest that that's not even the correct analysis. That it's not, are we mature enough? Because that's not the singular metric of how political decisions are made, or how societies make good or bad political decisions. You know, say, are they mature? But maybe wise and capable and motivated. I mean, it's a combination of a lot of things. And at this point, I think the empowerment of the internet and the undeniability of this being the best thing, the unavoidability of the truth, just by how much the internet has improved the conversation despite current censorship, is enough that I have faith in humanity eventually doing the right thing. I hope it doesn't take 100 years for us to like evolve to be fundamentally more mature. But I think in the next generation, we will cross whatever that cultural or psychological line is to be sufficiently not dependent upon centralized national identities to make some changes.
I'm going to go right back to, I want to get Robert and the rabbi in, because Robert is a radio show host. Robert, thoughts, feelings, and then the rabbi. Everybody jump in. What do you think Adam's saying? What do you think Jason's saying? Both these guys are smart. Both of them are studied. What's the right answer? Or is it a combination of both of them? Let's go to Robert, then the rabbi.
Yeah, it's a combination of both. I think the only thing we can really do at this point is I'd say like the first step is just talking about it. That's all I can say really at this point.
Rabbi, you're a learned man. You broke me down a couple times, and I was better for it. What's the right way to look at this? Where's America going? Do we have the maturity? Do we not have the maturity? Are things getting better? Are they getting worse? Or is it a complex amalgamation of everything combined?
You got to ask a more specific question.
Okay. Is national divorce going to get worse, or are we mature? Do we have the maturity as Americans to peacefully separate?
Wow. Do we?
You wanted a specific question.
Do we? Well, obviously some of us do and some of us don't. And
can't you do the thing where you talk poetically like a professor and you have these psychological terms and stuff like something?
No, I wish it were that simple. I think more people have the maturity to look at it nowadays, but the people who are at risk of losing their power, it's not maturity, it's power. And they're not going to let it go. So, I just want to I just want to share one thought, which may or may not be apropos here. A lot of people look at this whole secession thing as it's never going to work. And when you use the term national divorce, and I prefer peaceful separation, but when you use national divorce, when people get divorced, they don't say, is it going to work when we're apart? And if not, we'll stay together. They say, there's no way in the world we can stay together because we're destroying ourselves and destroying our family and destroying our children if we have any. Therefore, we have no choice but to make it work. And I think that's a little bit part of this discussion as well. But there's those of us who are saying, we don't care how it ends up. We just know that this can't go on. And does that take maturity to realize that? I'm not sure what that takes. But
let's go now to Louis Marinelli, the California secessionist. What do you think of Rabbi Stephen Axelman, also known as the rabbi to multiple secession movements across America? And how does that relate to what Jason Wright or Mr. Wright said and what Adam Kokesh said? Louis Marinelli.
Well, I literally just connected, so I didn't hear most of what any of them said. In fact, anything that the first.
So what we're real quick, we're talking about is, does the topic of national divorce seem like it's here to stay? Is it a fluke? And if it is here, and Americans are willing to talk about this, do we believe that Americans have the ability to peacefully do this? Or are we so mad at each other, we're going to rip each other apart, and there really isn't a chance for peaceful divorce?
Well, I think that it's the last area of common ground that can be found, if that answers the question. I think that people understand, or when we at least travel around and start to talk about this in campaign style, that people will understand that there's two choices that we have. We can continue to be at each other's throats and hate each other and have growing animosity in society, gridlock in Washington, or we can agree to disagree and peacefully part ways, knowing that although that process is going to be long and drawn out and difficult, And at the end of that process, each side will respectively be able to have a country that reflects the values that they have personally, and have a government that reflects their values and represents them ideologically and culturally. Whereas right now, the situation is that we can continue, for the sake of nostalgia, for example, to be one country, United States. And there's also this, I don't know, why we continue, well, at least not we, I would say, but a lot of people continue to believe that for some reason Americans are better than splitting up. Somehow because of our nationality and our passport and our flag and our patriotism, somehow we're above the idea that we will ever fall as an empire. And I think it's important to recognize that the United States is an empire, and that empires rise and fall. And it's eventually going to happen one day or another. Now, we can do it peacefully, and we can avoid a lot of the negative consequences of, like, the fall of an empire, because could happen suddenly. And in doing so, we can allow each side to have the type of country it wants to have, and the type of country it wants to make out of the United States. But they're never going to be able to make it out of the United States. Any kind of idea that we could, as a society, come to the table and fix these diametrically opposed worldviews in some way and make some kind of common ground requires us to compromise. But we can't compromise our values, and we shouldn't compromise our values. And that's why we can't solve these problems, because the problems that we have are values. They're problems, they're not really a problem, I guess. The differences that we have are differences in value systems. And in order for us to fix this division in society and end the animosity and hatred in society, political animosity and hatred in society, one side would have to compromise their values, or both sides would in some way have to compromise their values, and neither side is going to do that, nor should they. We're not talking about, let's set up a tax system in some way. That's not why we have this problem in society, because we're debating economics. That could be something that we could work out. We could come to the table and we could negotiate and compromise, and we've done that for decades, because that doesn't require us to compromise our value system. But when you're talking about things like abortion, for example, it's going to be a hot button issue, even more so next year when the Supreme Court comes out in one way or the other on their decision on what's going to potentially overturn Roe v. Wade. For there to be compromise on that issue, one side is going to have to compromise their values. One side is going to have to say, for example, yes, it's a woman's right to choose to do with her own body. It's important for her to have that right, but we're going to limit that right of a woman to do what she thinks she needs to do with her body. And we're going to limit that autonomy because we're going to compromise with the Republicans, or we're going to compromise with the conservatives. And likewise, the other side of the equation, they think that abortion is murder. And they count the number of these murders that have been going on since Roe v. Wade was legalized, or Roe v. Wade was decided in the Supreme Court. They literally count it. Like, I think the number is over 40 million aborted fetuses that they're counting the number because they consider them human lives. And I'm not taking a side right now on that issue. I'm simply pointing out that there are two diametrically opposed views on that. And in order for there to be a relaxation of the problem in our society, you have to come to compromise on that issue. But the conservatives are not going to say, well, you know what, abortion is murder and it stops a beating heart, but we're going to allow it to happen sometimes for the sake of compromise. And so that kind of diametrically opposed worldview, there's no common ground there. We're not going to be able to come to some kind of point where, well, let's have abortion be legal up until a certain point, and then both sides are going to be content with that. Because it's still going to be either limiting a woman's right to have autonomy over her own body, or it's going to be allowing people to, stop a beating heart or end a human life and so on and so forth. So there's no common ground to be met there. And there are a lot of other issues where there's similar worldviews that are so different that there's no common ground to be found without compromising one's value system. And so that goes back to the question, is that perhaps this national divorce is an area where we can find common ground, because we can recognize that at the end of that tunnel, and we put in a lot of work to make it happen. We come up with a national divorce settlement. At the end of that, it means that both sides of those issues can have the country that reflects their values, and that neither side, compromise their values to come to compromise, for example. And so I think that that's why this is so popular amongst the American population now that the national conversation is going on. It's simply because people understand that, wait a minute, this is an opportunity to end all of this problem, all of these problems in society. We don't have to be in a constant state of protest. I mean, I don't know if anybody out there really wants to constantly dedicate their life to community organizing, protesting, going on strike. I mean, some people do it and enjoy it, but I think that most people who participate in political protests and community organizing do it because they feel they need to do it. But imagine a world where you didn't need to do that, where you didn't have to dedicate so much of your life to organizing and finding like-minded people to rally with you and march in the streets with you and get out the vote because you need to save your future. You shouldn't have to live in a country where you're constantly mobilizing to save your future because of a results of an election. And so national divorce allows that to happen because national divorce will give each side the type of country that they envision in a way that they can have an election, and it's not going to be, as they say every time, the most important election of your life. Elections shouldn't be the most important election of your life every cycle.
That's true.
And so, but it is though. And actually, it's really not though, but that's what they say because they want to get you mobilized and they want to get you emotionally connected to the issue. But every cycle, I mean, I remember talking about it already. 2024 is going to be the most important election in your lifetime. 2020 was the most important. 2016 was the most important. And so it shouldn't be that way. You should have a country where you can have an election and you have a generally politically homogenous population, which would be ideal. So generally, there's widespread agreement and consent on the big issues, on the abstract issues, on the main points, on the values of your country. And then you can have elections to settle the minute details of policy preferences. What the tax rate is going to be. Is it going to be 5% or 8%? How long is maternity leave going to be? Is it going to be 2 years or is it going to be 4 years? Those are going to be
one. And so there's also, if I may, real quick, just to further what you're saying with other examples, Medicare for all, and universal basic income, which is something like many millions of Americans are really like in dire need of right now just to survive. But there's like half of the country holds it up and prevents it from happening because they believe it's socialism and some bad thing. And like, you're one step away from communist Russia there,
Well, yeah, and you know what, Jason?
If we split, then they can go ahead and not have Medicare for all and not have universal basic income. And those of us who want it can.
Yeah, those of you who want it can have it. And hey, guess what? Let it be socialism if that's what it is. But you can call it whatever you want to. And let the people on the other side of the border say, hey, look at that socialist country over there. And it's not going to make a difference because you have Medicare for all. That's what that population wanted for its people. And you're saying about half the country holds things up. It's not necessarily true that half the country holds things up. It could be one senator from Wyoming or South Dakota.
That's true. It could be the Speaker of
Medicare for all for 320 million people. It's ridiculous.
It could be the Speaker of the House during Christmas time holding up a, stimulus economic impact fund from going out just because the sitting president at that time was someone she didn't like. Pelosi.
Well, let me cut you guys off real quick because we have Kokesh here, we have Jason, Rabbi Axelman from New York, Lewis is in another continent, Adam Kokesh is from Arizona, and the rest are here in California. So, Lewis, while you were talking, I showed how national divorce is blowing up, right? So there was a huge amount of talk about Calexit right before the election. It has been 6 to 8 months of a desert as far as coverage, and all of a sudden, the last 2 to 3 weeks, it's exploding. We predicted it was going to keep going 2 to 3 weeks, and here it is. As Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they attack you. So they ignored the topic of national divorce when Sarah Silverman brought it up, and you had Fox News anchors replying. Then they laughed at it, like, look at those stupid conservatives. But then a poll came out showing 52% of Trump voters, and now they are attacking it. While you were speaking, we were showing headlines of national divorce is so stupid and backwards and dumb. So we're at part 3 of the Gandhi evolution, which is the one that comes right before we win. They're attacking us. Here are the top 3 attacks. I wanted to get everybody's opinion on this. Adam, Lewis, Jason. Number 1, national divorce would be horrible because all those minorities left behind in red America, boy, you know, they have rights now, and life would be a third world hellhole for them. We're going to go to you first, Lewis.
I want dibs on that question, though, because I love that.
Fine. Yeah, we're going to go to that. And then part 2 is, if America's broken up, immediately China and Russia jump in and start controlling the states, and they launch ground invasions, with one of my favorites, if you ever saw the movie Red Dawn. And then number 3, there's conservatives in blue states, and there's liberals in red states. You can't have states leave. What happens then? So let's go to the first one, Lewis and everybody. California and New York break off. Minorities in the rest of America are destroyed, and they lose rights like they've never had before, and we can't leave because of the poor minorities left in.
Yeah, I actually misread that question, so I guess, but I can answer that one too.
Go for it.
Chime in. I'll give my 2 cents, I guess, on all of them once everybody has a chance to speak. But yeah, I saw this argument that, you know, it's the same thing with just Calexit, because there's a distinction between Calexit and national divorce, and that Calexit is just about the state of California, just like Texas is just about the state of Texas. National divorce is on a broader level. That's the dissolution of the union type of thing.
Sure.
Breaking up the union in a more abstract point. But this is the same argument that we have when people say we can't leave the union because we're going to leave the rest of the union to be, living under the Republican control forever. So
yeah, like Gavin Newsom said that.
Yeah. Well, if we talk about on the Calexit, just to remind people that if California leaves the union by itself and the rest of the union remains intact, and we have the Electoral College, for example, let's remember that California hasn't affected the result of a presidential election since the middle of the 1860s, or 1800s, I'm sorry. And that's because the winner of presidential elections has won by a larger margin than the number of California's electoral votes are. So, for example, 2020, the winner of that presidential election won by a margin larger than California's 55 electoral votes. 2016, Trump won by larger than that. Or the candidate won California and would have won anyway because they won by a margin larger than that number. So you have to go back to the middle of the 1800s to find an election where the Electoral College vote was within the margin of votes that California brought to the Electoral College. And so we don't affect the results of the presidential election. So having California leave the union would not affect those results. And California's 55 electoral votes would be redistributed to the other states because it would be set by law right now that the Congress consists of a certain number of representatives and senators. And so therefore the Electoral College consists of 535 seats. And so those numbers, there's a really complex formula, and there's actually an Excel sheet that I have somewhere that kind of allows you to play around with it. If you take out a state's electoral votes, how it gets automatically divided into the other states. And so there's a way you can see where those 55 state electoral votes get redistributed. And they don't, for example, go to Republican states. They go to them based on population, which means that those 55 electoral votes, most of them, a good portion of them anyway, go to a lot of blue states, which would increase their power in the Electoral College. So you have to look at it deeper than just saying that California leaves the union and all of a sudden the Electoral College, they take their 55 electoral votes with them and that leaves the Republicans to win. No, it doesn't, because we don't have enough of a vote margin to affect the elections anyway. And 2, the 55 electoral votes don't go with us. They stay in the Electoral College and they get redistributed to other states based on population. And a lot of the populous states are blue states, like New York, for example.
Let's get your answer to these other 2 questions, and then we'll go to everybody. So I thought that was pretty good. What you're saying is, even if California left, it's Senate seats, you lose 2. That's not going to change the Senate. They've never changed the presidential election, and the electoral votes would go to other states, which are roughly going to be red and blue. So it's not like California leaves and everything shifts red anyways. It kind of stays where it was at.
Yeah. And also, I'll point out that California in the union didn't stop Donald Trump from getting elected. It didn't stop George Bush from getting elected. So, I mean, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, it's like as if California is in the union now and we never have Republican presidents. We have had presidents who are Republican for at least half of my life. So, anyway, let's go to question number 2.
Well, and that, just to back you up real quick, that's what Cenk Uygur said in New York Magazine was you leave and all these minorities are going to be trashed on because America's a racial utopia, in which case I made a video going, well, Cenk, what about the border wall? What about kids in cages? I mean, that started under Obama, through Trump, and Biden's doing it now. So California being part of America did not keep brown-skinned Latin kids out of concentration Jewish Warsaw Ghetto-style conditions. I mean, that happened under 3 administrations. The other thing is that Donald Trump banned the amount of immigrants and refugees coming in, and Biden kept it up. The other thing is that Donald Trump bailed on the Kurds. Biden bailed on the Afghanis. So what enlightened period are we talking about? Black Lives Matter didn't happen until after Obama was around. So the great black president could do nothing to enforce the way black people were treated by the police. How do we know that? Because the black people themselves rose up and did it after his administration. So you're putting down brown people, you're putting down black people. What sort of racial utopia is we're providing already? Just to back you up, let's go to question 2. If there's a national divorce, California leaves, maybe other states leave. China, Russia immediately moves in, takes control of that state, and uses it as a Israeli launching ground to wage war or create a hostile condition for the rest of the United States.
Yeah, I've seen the attacks on national divorce, and one thing I always like to bring up is the fact that whenever these people bring up their problems with national divorce, their arguments are never based on how great the country is or how effective the union is or how great federalism works and so on and so forth. It's nothing about let's keep the union together because the union's working. They don't ever say that. I'm waiting for that. Let's keep the union keep working because the union is working. Let's stay in the union because the union is working. Let's have that article. It's not going to come up because nobody could make that argument with a straight face. You'd be laughed out of the news industry. So they always turn their attention outward. And so, for example, they say, oh, China and Russia would benefit and they would be, licking the chops to have the United States break up and so on and so forth. But there's many reasons why they wouldn't like that to happen. And it really can be boiled down to a simple thing of called stability and predictability. And if, right now, China and Russia have a relatively predictable adversary in the United States. They know what the United States is, what it represents, what it believes in, what it's willing to stand up for, what it's willing to stand up against. They generally know what the United States is, and they know like a child. I know the United States likes to pretend it's a police of the world and interact with other countries like they're children in some ways. So let's make that analogy in that context. Like a child, the child will sometimes specifically do things to test their boundaries and see what they can get away with. Right. Well, China and Russia know what they can get away with, and they know where the United States is going to draw that line, in some context. And so, if you have all of a sudden a national breakup, now you're going to have several different countries in North America. They're going to start from square one, trying to reanalyze and replan and strategize their foreign policy for not only North America, but for the rest of the world. And so, how is that in China's interest or Russia's interest for them to have right now a relatively stable and predictable adversary that they can work around and they can achieve their national and foreign policy objectives within that framework? But then all of a sudden now they have, in the case of China, for example, you're going to have the Republic of California, which is inevitably going to take a more hardline approach towards requiring the Chinese to do something about carbon emissions in their industries.
True.
It's inevitably going to enforce the Chinese, or at least attempt to force the Chinese to improve their record on human rights. And
True.
So that's not in China's interest to have all of a sudden the 5th largest economy in the world going to take a hardline approach to get the Chinese to reduce their carbon emissions and improve their human rights record. Now, Texas, for example, may not do that. But Texas may be taking on a more mercantilist approach towards their economy and trying to attract businesses that left Texas or left the United States, come to Texas, and that will impact Chinese economic plans and the work for Chinese workers. If the Texas, which is also a major GDP, were to start attracting businesses. That's what they're so popular for, right? Everyone loves to go to Texas now because they have such a great business climate. Well, imagine Texas with its great business climate on the national level as a country, attracting businesses from around the world, including China. China loses out on the outsourcing of American businesses to China. That's not in China's interest. And so there's so many ways that you can analyze the situation from that point of view, where they have a lot to lose if the United States were to break up, and not much to gain, except for maybe we can concede that they'd be sitting over there, giving each other high fives because the United States broke apart. But the next day, they got to look at the world. It's a whole new world, and they're starting from square one. How is that in their interests?
Just to back that up, so here's a little bit to back up what Lewis is talking about. They talk about pushovers, but here's California suing the Chinese government for COVID-19. We can't even get Joe Biden to admit that it comes from there at all. California businesses are already suing China because they're like, no, that's not cool. And then California already went after China they had some Chinese companies working in California, and they were running things like they did in their country, and California sued them. So that's two instances of Californians going, we're going to go after China in ways that America never will, on rights abuses and human rights and labor laws. And the Chinese government was not pleased with that. So, yeah.
And I'll actually add to that point that I would agree with that. I think that one of the great things about California independence is that we could push the Chinese to improve their human rights record, which is abysmal. And we could push the Chinese to do something about climate change, because if we really want to take on climate change, and we want to take on the approach that it's human-caused climate change, if we accept that notion that it's human-caused climate change based on our industry and our production and so on and so forth, well, most of that emissions come from China. And that's where the most people live. And so if we are, as a country, going to do something to reduce our carbon emissions, and other countries around the world which have signed on to those climate treaties, like France and England and Italy, that's small potatoes. What we need to have is China take some big steps towards reducing their emissions if something's going to be done, because this is one planet. It's a circle, or it's a sphere, to make the flat earthers out there upset. It's a sphere, and so the pollution moves around the planet, and so it's not like one country or a number of countries can do something, but then the world's most populous country does nothing or little, and then we're going to be protected from man-made climate change. So they need to do something too. And I think that California, as an independent country, would at least attempt to pressure them to do so.
Let's also add the fact that Barack Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize. He went to China. They had a guy in prison who died there, and he said absolutely nothing to them at all. He was accompanied by President Carter, who said nothing to them at all. So what pushback of China is going on right now? Joe Biden literally excused China executing Uyghur Muslims live on CNN. So when people are like, oh, California, you'll be a punk to China, I go, no, we're not America. So please don't act like America's standing up to China. They're not. Barack didn't. Trump may have. Biden did not. Clinton did not. So let's get that nonsense out of our head that they're pushing them in any sort of way. We've showed you two examples of Californians suing them and not caring what the federal government did. So labor laws and stuff like that. Plus, Xi Jinping chose California as the place for his first meeting after he won election. Why? Because there's so much Chinese money and people here. He can't screw with us because it affects billionaires back in his country. We have a little bit of partial independence. Finally, I want to point out this idea of you're independent, and so China and Russia is going to come and set up a base. Why? Where does that happen? Like, Russia and China don't get to set up a base in Mexico or Canada. America would never let that happen. In fact, America forced China to attack them on the Huawei China communication thing. Let me show you that real quick. Canada has effectively moved to block China's Huawei from 5G. So there was a Chinese cell phone company. They were worried about them spying on Americans, and then Canada blocked them from pressure from America. And then they arrested the CEO from pressure from America. So if Canada's a separate country, and yet America's like, no, you're not having China come in, then why would we think if California is a separate country, America would just let China come in? They don't do that with Mexico or Canada. So why would they do it with us?
Yeah, and I would also point out that, and I'd like to bring this connection to Czechoslovakia, because Czechoslovakia in 1993, January 1st, 1993, broke up into two countries, and they called that the Velvet Divorce. And they actually used that terminology to represent the campaign there for the separation of Czechoslovakia into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And the thing that I like to bring up about that is today, those two countries, they don't hate each other. They're very close. They have a great relationship, and they even have a mutual defense agreement with each other. And so I believe, in at least the direction that, yes, California would take national divorce, is not that we're going to have a national divorce and cut off commerce and build walls and barbed wire fences and put barriers on our highways between our new countries and never talk to each other again. No, there's going to be continued commerce. There's going to be continued freedom of movement, continued like a Schengen visa area in Europe. They have the free movement in 44 countries in Europe. Most of them you can travel freely between them. Commerce is going to continue. And what's to stop California and Texas, now independent countries, no longer interfering with each other's domestic affairs, from signing a mutual defense agreement? I think I would encourage that. We're still American brothers and sisters in North America, and we should stand shoulder to shoulder with each other. And so if that's the context, and if, for example, California and Texas signed a mutual defense agreement with each other, in what universe is Russia going to have a military base in one of those two countries? It wouldn't work. You wouldn't have a mutual defense agreement if your quote-unquote primary geopolitical foe is setting up military and naval bases in Texas and California. So just because we have a national divorce doesn't mean we're going to split and go to different planets, like some people kind of speak about, like we're seceding from the earth. No, we're still going to be in North America. We're still going to have commerce in North America. We're still going to have freedom of trade in North America. And we're still going to be American brothers. Like when Jefferson spoke about manifest destiny going out west, he in the founding fathers talked about how, on the West Coast, there could be a republic that was independent of the United States, but still had common roots and history with the United States. That's the same kind of idea. And so these independent countries that result from national divorce could very well and should remain friends with each other. And as a result of national divorce, they actually can have a better chance of being friends with one another, because we're not going to be interfering with each other's domestic affairs. And that's the key, that the people of California trying to impose our worldview on the people of Texas and Florida. And likewise, the Texans and Floridians are trying to tell us what we have to do in California. That's the key. That's the problem that we have. And if we get rid of that problem, then nothing stands in the way of these now independent countries from working together, having a free trade zone, freedom of movement zone, and even mutual defense agreements with one another. And therefore, that excludes the possibility of Chinese or Russian military bases in North America.
I want to point out, here's this book. This is the book that got Calexit started. It inspired me to write the book that started this whole thing. It's called Global California Rising to the Cosmopolitan Challenge. It's by Lowenthal. He's a professor at SoCal. And basically, this book is about how California is massively an international trade place, and it's always held back and loses billions of dollars from the federal government because we're way into international trade and they're not. Now, part of the thing he points out is that this goes back 120 years. So the first time that America was looking at international trade, it was a bunch of Californians under Hearst, the Hearst Publishing Group. You have to go that far back. So all of the international trade America's done over 120 years is because a bunch of Californians came to them and said, we need to do this. If we're all NAFTA, World Trade Organization, so if California is all about international trade, why would we suddenly stop doing it the second we secede? Right? We've done it for 120 years. All the international trade America does is our idea. Suddenly we're seceding and we're going, I don't want to do that the way I've done it for a century. That makes no sense at all. That makes no sense. And this is what I ask people, like, are you worried about trade? Would you cut off? And I go, who are you speaking about? It's not us. We've never acted that way. What people are you speaking about? What culture or history are you pointing to?
Yeah. And California, for example, produces so much produce that's consumed by the other American states, and dairy products and fruits and vegetables that, are they going to go hungry now because they don't want to trade with California?
That's, yeah.
And where are they who's going to grow avocados? Who's going to grow all the products that we grow in California? Who's going to supply? Where are they going to come up with the extra 20% of the dairy supply that they get from California because they don't want to talk to us anymore after a national divorce. I mean, couples, when they get divorced, I know that we were speaking earlier about, the analogy to a divorce with the couples. After divorce, many couples often have better relationship with one another. And so why couldn't that extend to the idea that California and Texas now are so different culturally and politically that we don't like each other and we tease each other right now, and there's a lot of animosity there. But afterwards, if we're not interfering with each other's domestic affairs, that we could actually get along pretty well.
Yeah, I personally saw that with my parents, right? They were going at it and then they got divorced, and they at least had to respect each other because they were independent of each other, and that forced them to behave like adults. Let's go to the third question. There's one more after this. I really want to get your opinion. So this is the other major attack against Calexit. Hey, you can't have states break off. There's conservatives and liberals, and there's liberals in red states. And, they're pointing out here in California, about 25% is hardcore red state, mostly in the upper fifth region of California. Can states secede even if they have a minority who is of the opposite political opinion?
So I think that this is where my opinion may differ from many others in the Calexit movement. And it's because I believe that we need to recognize that we're living in that proverbial house that Abraham Lincoln spoke about. The house that's divided against itself cannot stand. We're still living in that proverbial house, and it's now divided again, but it's divided along different lines. Whereas in the 1860s and before that, it was divided along state lines. I mean, it was really an issue of states' rights and loyalty to your state versus loyalty to the federal government, state pride, and so on and so forth. I'm a South Carolinian, I'm a Tennessean, I'm a Texan, not an American, so to speak. We don't have that same civic pride in one's state in this day and age, where that's the driving force behind this cultural divide and national divorce. And so I personally take the position that we should redraw the lines through national divorce. And we can, look at data from state assembly district elections, state assembly district elections, congressional district elections, governor elections, county level elections. We can see where red America is based on those election results, not just from one election, but you can look at it over several decades. We have that information. And so we can get a good picture about, okay, where's red America? Where's blue America? Where's purple America? And then we can start maybe drawing some lines that make sense. And I'm not saying to completely reinvent the wheel here and just draw lines that, like the United States likes to do in Africa and in the Middle East. We just start drawing lines that are straight lines in the middle of nowhere. But we can draw lines that make sense. And if it ends up where, for example, I advocate for the right of the people of Northern California to separate from California, because why should California drag the northern part of the state with us out of the union if they're happy and they want to be part of the American country and they're patriotic and they love the stars and stripes and so on and so forth? Why would we drag them out of the country if they want to stay? And so if we're going to support the right of self-determination, which is really what the core of Calexit is, then we have to support the right of self-determination of the people within California as well. And it really goes down to, this idea that these red areas of the country and these blue areas of the country, yes, they're very now mixed up, but there's a lot of migration, let's say, going on right now. There are conservative Californians, Republicans who are living in California and who have been moving to places like Idaho and Arizona and Texas and Florida in droves. We hear about it all the time, but this big California exodus. Now, whether or not there's an exodus or not is still kind of up for a debate, but there are people leaving for political reasons. And they're going to places that more reflect their values and give them another chance at the pursuit of happiness that they were promised, the Declaration of Independence. And so political migration is a part of our society now. It's been a part of our society since forever. In fact, if we remember why people came to North America, the Pilgrims, let's go back to the 1600s with the Pilgrims. They came to North America because they were looking for freedom of religion. and to escape political persecution. And the immigrants from Europe after them came to escape political persecution. So that's political migration. But they crossed an ocean in a wooden ship for months to do that. What we're talking about now is if you get stuck behind enemy lines, so to speak, you're going to move a couple hundred miles and you'll be in a red country or you'll be in a blue country. That's very feasible. And it's something that people are doing now. They're going to Texas. They're going to Idaho. They're going to Arizona. Tesla just moved their headquarters to Texas. Companies are moving now. A lot of times because of political or economic reasons, which are connected, of course. And so if people are moving now based on political preferences, and companies are moving now based on what's best for them economically, where they can find a better tax environment or business environment, then that trend can continue after national divorce. But at least people will have a better idea of where they can go that will better reflect their values. Because right now, even if you move to Texas, and next year the Supreme Court rules, for example, that Roe v. Wade stands, well, you're still going to be in a country that has legal abortion. You're not going to be satisfied. But you just moved from California to Texas thinking you were going to some Republican conservative utopia, and you're going to be let down. So if we have a national divorce, and Texas will certainly outlaw abortion, according to their value system. California will certainly protect and expand abortion access for women, according to our value system. Then when people do this political migration, they can know for sure that where they're going is going to reflect their values. They're not going to be let down as a result.
So Californians are moving to Texas and other places. Here's what they're talking about is, see a lot of red, and even in these red states, there's this deep swath of blue. Here's majority blue California, and here's the deep swath of red. What Lewis was saying is that people are conservatives, mostly from these areas here, are already leaving, and they're going to other places. So yes, you can have a lot of people peacefully leave because it's already been happening in California. Secondly, I want to point out that this is really where the hardcore Trump support is. See this dark red kind of here, and then it comes in down.
That's Shasta County up there.
Yeah. So I'm right here in Fresno. See how it's light pink and then light pink? That's because these are going blue. They're not there yet, but they're not this. This area here in the top fifth of California is Jefferson. It really more closely matches this area, whereas these are going to go this way. So what we're talking about is we can keep most of this California here. We might.
Yeah, not only just that part of California, but also look at how the other part of the American Southwest there is largely blue. If you're looking at Arizona and New Mexico, I mean, there's no reason why that couldn't join together, for example, for a southwestern, West Coast blue country, for example. Look at that.
Right there.
Denver, for example, is a very liberal city in a red state, and people don't like the impact that Denver has on Colorado, especially when it comes to Second Amendment issues. And so why look at that little, it's like perfect opportunity there to cut that little part out of central Colorado and move it in there together with New Mexico and potentially parts of Arizona along the border and into California. And you have a kind of a western, southwestern blue progressive country, diverse population that's going to have a similar historical background, cultural background, languages, ideology is going to be similar. It's going to work better than being stuck in this larger Republican, this red, look at all that red, that sea of red in the middle there. It would
and also better. This part here, Texas, this part of Santa Fe, Texas, Texans people never considered this like Texas. So this could go in there too. You know,
yeah, nice so that conversation can go on for a long time about where to draw those lines. I'm saying that those lines can be drawn in a way that makes sense.
Because these are county lines.
I'm seeing potential that, a lot of America doesn't seem to like having a border with our southern neighbor, Mexico. So maybe we could take that off of their hands for them and manage all of that for them, because we don't seem to really mind it, and we actually kind of have some, middle ground, sensible solutions that like average ordinary citizens come up with on a day-to-day basis. So like, I think we could probably handle that one for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they don't have to worry about all the illegal border crossings going on and stuff like that. But yeah, that's a great map to look at because that shows how it's possible to draw lines, and they're not going to be perfect. They're still going to have, as I say, you're going to have liberals stuck behind enemy lines, and you're going to have conservatives stuck behind enemy lines. But that's where, if you want, the political migration can occur. And some people will inevitably stay because they're not so political, and they're going to make it work. But some people, if you take, for example, you mentioned, Marcus, that those pink counties in Central California are going and trending blue. There's going to be some diehard Republicans there. In fact, I know some of them who are diehard Republicans, and they right now are considering the option of moving to another state. And so if there was a national divorce and they ended up in California, they could move to, Oregon, Nevada, Utah. They can move to Wyoming, or they can go to somewhere like Missouri or Oklahoma. They can move somewhere else if that's what they wanted to do, and they'd be free to do that. So why not encourage that? And that way you can have politically homogenous society, and you don't have the arguing, and you don't have the animosity and the division and the gridlock. And then if you have this society which can generally agree on the basic principles of your society, your government will function and get things done. Now, the people of Texas might not like what the Independent Republic of California is doing. They're going to mock it out. Oh, look at the socialists are doing over there in California. But you know what? After national divorce, it's not their problem anymore. Problem solved.
Just want to show everybody. So that's, 60, 70% for Trump. They're not going to change, right? And that matches this. But when we go here, we're looking at 51%. 52%. That's what I mean. They barely voted for Trump. So they'll probably stay. These places that are really dark, 56 approaching 60, I don't think so, right? I think these people, they believe what they believe. And so if someone's going to leave, I think we can agree that it'd be mostly these people here. There are conservatives here. I know my stepdad lives here, and he likes Trump for tax reasons and stuff, but they're a minority. They know that. This area might lose, but that's what I want to let people know is it's just this top third or this top fifth. Very low population, just to show you. Here's the actual California, right? So we're talking about these people. It's a small amount of population. It's largely cut off from the economy, and these are the people who would probably want to leave. Whether you like that solution or not, like Lewis is saying, there's differences of opinion. We could easily afford that. We could easily afford to lose this small amount of the population that's really isolated from the rest of the people in the rest of the economy and very few votes. That's a doable thing. The only issue would be the water.
So if I could cut in, is that okay?
Yeah.
Where I acknowledge my opinion does usually differ from what Lewis has presented here, I do see the viability and the value in what's being said, what Lewis, you have said here. I would kind of slightly counter, and I say kind of slightly because it's not that I disagree with it, it's that part of me feels that it might not really even come to that, because where there is this hard line of red and blue being drawn, when it comes down to it, most of the Californians, and I'm born and raised California, I've seen all 50 states, I've lived in some other places, but the majority of my life has been spent here. And all over, meeting people from all walks of life, even walks of life that I don't choose for myself. And I found that most Californians can actually be fair and reasonable. Most Californians seem to really value this rationale that, comes with this image of California being progressive and forward thinking and being smart with the moves that we make, right? We don't just jump onto a train or a bandwagon just because it's the hot new thing, usually. Our our society, our government may, but our society, right? We pick up things that we deem to be of actual interest and value. And so, you know, it says to me, our society, though there is the red and the blue, I mean, the second largest portion outside of the blue isn't actually the red, it's the middle ground. It's all of the third parties, Green Party, independent parties, people like myself. And so I think an independent California would actually be able to be welcoming and meet in the middle with folks. Are we going to do anything like, you know, enact a pro-Ku Klux Klan mandate where everyone must attend a Klan rally once a week? No. Oh, hell no.
But there will be other mandates, though, that
California
is a mandate queen.
That is true. That is very true. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to our current governor and the fact that he hasn't given up those emergency powers that, you know, he's been clinging on to for dear life.
Okay, let's get the third question, then I got to go to the fourth. So, Jason, how do you feel about the third question? And then we're going to go to Lewis with the fourth.
Sorry, refreshing my brain on it. Oh, yeah, so patches of blue in red, patches of red in blue. I was born in Sacramento, raised in Placer County and Nevada County areas. Old gold country, if you know the California gold rush history. There is a lot of red out there. There is also a fair amount of blue. And, you know, people I grew up with who were red, right? They weren't unreasonable people. I didn't find them, most of them, to be abrasive, rude, ignorant, right? I found most of the folks actually just to be people, average, ordinary human beings like all of us. I think ultimately an independent California would be accepting, both politically and policy-wise, as well as the structuring of our society. I think we would be much more accepting of our red brothers and sisters, and really anyone who doesn't think like us politically. I mean, keep in mind, I'm green. So the reds don't meet eye to eye with me just as much as the blues don't. So, you know, I really think we would get along together better as just ourselves.
Okay.
And let me specify real quick. Part of that is because there's not the national pull, right? The California Democratic Party gets all this heat and all this pull and all this money, all this media and attention from the National Democratic Party. So there wouldn't be that extra outside influence. We would be our own thing. California Republicans would, I mean, even today, they're still Californians. Republican, Green, Democrat, like, it's Libertarian, it doesn't matter. If you're a Californian, you're a Californian. At least in my eyes.
Fair enough, fair enough. We're going to go to question 4. I just want to give my opinion. So there's a lot of opinion of let these counties leave. I think we showed that they're mostly in the top north. We could allow that. My opinion is this, and I'm not saying it's the right one. States are recognized in American law and no other sub-governmental unit. So counties don't have the right to vote on anything. They exist because California said they do, and California exists because America said they do. So we don't have to give rights to units that don't actually exist under federal law. Federal law does allow for secession, but it goes down to the state. Secondly, the Californians would have to approve to let these people go. When they tried to split up California under 3 separate attempts under Tim Draper, it was like 65% were against it. So I don't think we have to do it. And I don't think a majority of Californians would go for it. And I think if they really didn't like it, they could just leave because they're already doing it right now. Let's go to question 4. We're not saying what's the right answer. We're just discussing. So Lewis, I got to ask you, if the red and the blue hate each other so much, why could they agree to a national divorce since they can't agree to anything else? This is, I constantly hear this, like, you guys hate each other so much. There's no way you'd get the votes from 35 states who hate you because they hate you. They would never agree to let you go. What?
Well, Marcus, is the only thing that both sides stand to gain from. Because we're not talking about a policy debate here where we're going to, like I was talking about before, deciding a tax bracket where you could potentially find some common ground there, but it's not really, you don't really get anything out of it if you don't get your way, 100% of it. But through national divorce, both sides get 100% of what they want. And so there is no compromise to make there because you're both getting everything you want. You get to have the people you hate no longer a part of your country, number one. You get to have a country that you could reorganize the way that you see fit, number 2. Once you reorganize your country the way you see fit, your government will operate as you want it to, and as you've worked for decades or years for the United States to work, but you failed at achieving that goal because the United States doesn't work. And then going into the future, you have the types of laws and public policy preferences that you've always wanted to have in your country, whether it be something on a cultural issue like outlawing abortion through a human life amendment, like in Texas would do. You finally can achieve that. And if you're somewhere like California, you can, once and for all, completely protect the woman's right to access abortion forever. And so both sides get 100% of whatever they want to do. And we don't have to agree anymore or compromise anymore with people with a completely different worldview. And that's why it's possible to have a national divorce settlement, because both sides understand that we're going to come to this table to work out the national divorce settlement. But when we leave, I'm leaving with everything I want, and they're leaving with everything they want. So it's a win-win situation. And there are not really any other win-win situations in politics in America where you could say, well, let's have the left and the right, the Democrats and Republicans come to the table and discuss some topic. And at the end of the conversation, both sides leave with everything that they want. I don't think that there's any other issue that you could possibly put forth as an idea where 2 opposing political parties come to the table and have a conversation about it, and both sides leave with everything they wanted. It's not possible, except with national divorce. National divorce is the only common ground where we can come together. We can say, okay, let's put down our let's get out of each other's throats here for a second. And we're just going to agree to disagree. We'll sit down, we'll split up the assets, we'll share the debts, and then we'll leave and we'll part ways. And I'm going to take everything that I want, and you're going to take everything you want, and we'll live happily ever after. There's no other issue that description works for. Not on taxes, not on healthcare, education, mask mandates, vaccines, anything. There's no other issue that you can put forth where the 2 sides come together and both leave with everything they want.
So let's go to Adam Kokesh and then Jason. But I loved your answer because I always felt this was a silly question. Like, if you guys can't agree on anything, you'd never agree to separate from each other. And I'm like, that happens all the time. Couples do that all the time. They can't agree on anything, so they agree, let's agree to not be with each other. And we talked to conservatives in 35 states, and they said, yes, we don't like you and let you go. But you look at the newspapers out here in California, and they're like, oh, no, they love you. They'd never let you go. So newspapers out here say one thing. Americans we talk to say a totally different thing. And the pattern of divorce that we've seen doesn't match what the pundits are saying. Adam Kokesh, can people who disagree with each other agree that maybe we should just not be with each other? I mean, is that a possible thing here? Let's and then Lewis, if you'd respond to him, and then we'll go to Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to question one, if I may, the idea of protection of minorities, given America's history of violence and racism. It's an extremely important issue, and it's not one of fear mongering as so much of these other, well, China's going to invade, Russia's going to invade, your economy is going to collapse, blah, 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 that sort of raising of a new specter of fear, but the invoking of an old thing that we should legitimately be afraid of, which is racism driven violence. That is absolutely something we need to be concerned with. The problem with this being raised as an objection to decentralization in general is one of false attribution and a misunderstanding of history that has been rewritten by government. So a couple of things like about the Civil War being the big mythology of this. I know this might get you kicked off YouTube, little history revisionism here, pointing out some actually commonly accepted facts. One, that the Civil War cost more than it would have cost to buy and free all the slaves in the United States at that time, and it wouldn't have killed anybody. And Lincoln was a racist. He didn't care about that. But also to say that the federal government and a war deserve credit for making America more humane in regards to race ignores the very cruel history of the Jim Crow South. And so this idea that centralization of authority is somehow in the interest of protecting minorities as opposed to the direct opposite, which is the overall case, because minorities' rights and views are less relevant the bigger the political body and the more centralized the authority. So I want to see, an end to violent racism. And I look at what's the greatest source of it today. Well, it comes from the centralization of power. Violence and racism. To me, the biggest example is, obviously from my experience, the global war on terror. And we don't think about that as racist anymore, but some of us remember the fundamentally racist nature because we were conditioned to dehumanize all Arabs as, dune coons and hajis and so many worse racist terms. And then you think about, well, in the United States, where's the racism fueled violence? It's with the cops. And even though those are local institutions, there's bias in federal enforcement and in the courts, and even local law enforcement policy is largely determined by federal policy and federal funds and militarization of police forces. So I think just dispelling that and really reframing this and is very important to understanding the nature of government itself. But it's been great listening to Lewis and his answers to all that. And I just kind of want to echo all that and say it's been beautiful to hear him bat down some of these other fallacies that are really obvious if you step back and go, well, what does it say about the current system of centralized government? Oh yeah, it's fundamentally wrong.
Lewis, response?
I agree with everything you said. I think it's an important perspective to put on the fact that this we talk about specifically this question as it relates to how minorities are going to be protected in these countries that we allow to establish through national divorce. I mean, I think he said it perfectly. So it's not an issue. I'm not concerned. Like when I'm talking about national divorce, I'm not at all concerned that there's going to be a country in North America that's going to go out there and it's going to become some dictatorship that's going to try to have some kind of Central African genocide like there was in the 1900s or something, or 1990s or something like that. So I think it's just hyperbole, and it's not really a real problem. But we're talking about through this question, we're talking about protection of minorities. And one of the issues that I think that we don't talk enough about, and particularly where California fails. I know that California likes to pride itself in protecting minorities, but what we don't do in the minority group that we do not protect in California are those of political minorities. I know that this kind of goes in the face of what Jason was talking about, but we have in California one party rule, and they have a supermajority in the legislature, and we don't have any representation in the governor's office for political minorities or in the legislature of political minorities. Jason, is a member of, I think he said, the Green Party. The Green Party has 0 seats in the state legislature. So he's not represented in legislature ever. Jason is never represented in the state legislature. Someone who's a Republican may have some representation in the state legislature, but the Greens don't. The right-wing conservative groups don't. Peace and Freedom Party doesn't either. And so this is why I'm such an advocate of things like proportional representation in Sacramento, because in that way we can have political minorities be represented in government. Because right now we have the American system, which is the first past the post system, which means if you get 50.1% of the vote, you win. Well, what happens to the 49.9% who voted against you? They have no representation in government because they lost an election? I thought you were guaranteed to have representation in government as part of our system. That's what the basis of our system is. No taxation without representation. Well, Jason has no representation in the state legislature. How is the state taxing him for his work or sales tax and so on and so forth? He has no representation there. Yeah, his party didn't.
Here.
Because you lose an election doesn't mean you give up your constitutional right to representation. And so if we have proportional representation in the state legislature, even if his party doesn't get the majority of the votes, they get some portion of the votes, and therefore they get some portion of the seats, and he has representation there. And the other people who are in California who are members of the Green Party have representation in the state legislature, and the Peace and Freedom Party and the other minority parties. Why is it just Democrats and Republicans? Well, it's only Democrats and Republicans because they want to maintain that monopoly over the political structure. And by doing so, particularly the Democrats are guilty of this in California, they are not protecting the rights of political minorities. And so I don't believe that if California becomes an independent country, we would maintain that type of system, the American election system where it's first past the post. And I think that we need to go a long way into protecting political minorities. And we can do that by establishing proportional representation in Sacramento through the legislature so that political parties beyond the Democratic Party and beyond the Republican Party can have seats in the legislation, in the legislature. And then by doing so, as an extension of that, we can get rid of one-party rule. Because a lot of people, I know that Jason said the opposite about this. And he said that, for example, he's not a Democrat, not a Republican. He's a Green Party voter. But a lot of Green Party voters, because they know that their party's not going to win, they end up mostly voting for the Democratic Party. And same thing is probably true for people of the Peace and Freedom Party, because it's a little bit closer, more aligned with their values than the Republican Party is in many respects. And so I think that the Democrats are in such a position in California with one-party rule because all these minority groups out there, not minority groups, but minority political parties out there, know that they can't really win an election, so they inevitably start voting for Democrats. But if they all of a sudden knew that the Green Party would inevitably get some representation in Sacramento, all the Green Party people are going to vote for the Green Party candidates. No longer are there going to be any Green Party voters voting for Democrats or Republicans or anybody else. They're going to vote for Green Party candidates. And it's going to increase their percentage of the vote, which is going to increase their percentage in the state legislature. And the Peace and Freedom Party will vote only for members of the Peace and Freedom Party slate. And that'll increase their percentage of share of power in Sacramento. And then when you have in the Sacramento state legislature a proportional representation, maybe no party has a majority. So that forces the coalition government. So now all of a sudden the Democrats will probably get a large portion of the vote because they have, 40-some% of the population are registered Democrats. That's still not a majority. They're going to need to work together with perhaps the Green Party to get that 50%. Now that makes them and forces them to adopt a more ecologically friendly and climate change friendly policies in order to get the green votes in the legislature. And so by establishing that proportional representation in Sacramento, we can protect political minorities. Protecting political minorities encourages them to participate in the system and vote for the candidates and parties that actually represent their values. That allows those parties to actually win representation in Sacramento. So that's a cycle. It gives people then representation. And then the result of all of that is the idea that the Democratic Party will no longer have a monopoly over the power in Sacramento because they're going to have to get coalitions or form coalitions with some of the other minor parties in the state legislature in order to have a majority government in some respect. And it's not anything new. It's not like I'm sitting here and coming up with something new. This is something that's done around the world.
Yeah.
Even Russia. I mean, I know that people don't like Russia
Yeah.
for some reason. Russia has proportional representation. Now, another debate could be held about, the parties aren't real parties and they only support the Kremlin anyway and so on and so forth, but they have proportional representation.
So yeah, I don't want to get too distracted. Yes, California is not fair to political minorities. Yes, we need to be more fair. Yes, California did propose ranked choice voting proportional representation in an initiative, and we do work with a lot of conservatives. One thing I wanted to point out about this topic of minorities left behind is I think these are white liberals, and I'll just call them out. A lot of times white liberals speak for minorities and they don't know what the hell they're saying. So I'll call it out. I'm a minority. I can say that. Let me show you a couple things. This is and I call Cenk Uygur one of these people. So he thinks he knows what he's talking about. He doesn't. So Latinos, the majority of Texas, very recently, lots of Latinos moving to Texas. Lots of black people moving to Georgia. Texas and Georgia passing voter restrictions against minorities. So if America's a racial utopia and white liberals need to protect minorities, then why is it Texas and Georgia are passing regressive laws and yet they're crawling with minorities and minorities still keep going there? It's almost like minorities don't need white liberals to protect them. They'll make up their own decisions, and maybe that's what you think isn't actually what's best for them. I mean, I see this all the time. Oh, Georgia's so regressive. Georgia's so backwards. We have to protect the minorities there. Why are minorities moving there then? Texas is so backwards. Texas is regressive. Why are minorities blowing that place up? It's almost like white liberals don't necessarily know what minorities think when they talk for them. Maybe we should let minorities speak for minorities, and maybe we should look at the hard data. Now, I don't want to go to Georgia, and I don't want to go to Texas. My family left there. They are backwards. And I'm a minority who thinks they are regressive. But I get into this argument with white liberals all the time where they go, why did Latinos vote against Newsom? Because we think for ourselves and he ruined our economy? And that was white liberals kept asking me that. Why aren't they all for the Democrats? Because you screwed them over and they're independent contractors? It's people not knowing what minorities are actually like and thinking they all have some universal mantra, and that's just not true. So when I see people say we have to protect the minorities, I'm like, have you talked to minorities, and are you actually one, or are you projecting onto them? Because Georgia and Texas destroy this talking point of California can't leave because all the minorities will be disadvantaged. If that's really the case and there's a racial utopia, you would not have Texas and Georgia blowing up with red and brown and other darker people. Just throwing that out there. Okay, Lewis, is national divorce going to get bigger? Is it not? Where are we going?
I think that there's a coordinated effort right now, as you were referring to before, to kind of attack it. And we went through this before when Calexit grew up and matured in 2016, 2017. And they started to go after it pretty hard because of the fact that it was becoming a pretty popular idea. And now we've seen that people are largely supportive of national divorce. I mean, if you go and look at the conversation happening, not between the so-called experts who are writing their articles, but the comments to those articles, and the people that are having a conversation about it amongst themselves in society, just regular people, I think everybody's down. That's why I say that national divorce would be, the most uncontested divorce in world history, because nobody's really opposed to it. Because the people that are opposed to it are like these political pundits and the so-called experts, the people who say that, Donald Trump will never win in 2016. They were the experts writing about that, and he won, and, like Karl Rove, for example, and he was famous for him miscalling the elections. And I think it was in 2016 or 2012. So, these people, National Review, writers, other writers, calling it a stupid idea. They're all parroting each other. There's the same arguments that they're all just regurgitating and rephrasing, and yet none of them can talk about how great the country is as a reason for it to stay together. Nobody can talk about how great the union works or the federalism works or checks and balances still works.
And just to back up Lewis real quick, let me show you this is exactly what he's talking about. So here, 2017, when Calexit got really big, Calexit is a horrible idea. 2017. Calexit is a horrible idea. 2017. Calexit is a horrible idea. 2017. Calexit is a horrible idea. Like colossally, so they're all 2017. So if you go to 2017, right when we were big, there's a ton of articles on the dumbest thing ever is Calexit.
Well,
Why
you
do they
gotta
come out
you
saying
gotta
that?
pull up the article from the National Review. The guy says that national divorce is a poisonously stupid idea. And so now they're trying to get creative with their adjectives because they've just, poisonously stupid. I don't think I've ever used the word poisonously in my life, and the adverb of it. And so, I mean, I'm an English teacher. I mean, I certainly understand what it means, but nobody says poisonously. And so
This is what he's getting at.
trying to get creative with his words, trying to stuff. This is national divorce is a poisonously stupid idea, and he goes through and talks about the same exact things that the other articles about national divorce have said about why it's not a good idea. But if you put that together, the context of all the other headlines from Calexit, and you didn't really read the articles, it's the same thing. Calexit is a very bad idea. Calexit is a terrible idea. National divorce is a stupid idea. What's it say? Poisonously stupid idea. They're all the same headlines. And it's really points to some kind of coordinated effort to try to discourage people from looking into the idea. Because I think that the more people become acquainted with both Calexit and national divorce on a more abstract level, that they come to support it. And that's what the system wants to avoid. And that's why we were attacked, because we were advocating for Calexit, and it was very popular, and it remains popular. The new poll that we were talking about recently showed that 40-some% of Californians support secession, national divorce.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge number, considering there's never been a campaign with a lot of money behind it that put out advertisements and really was able to communicate its message to the public. Your starting point is 40%. That's a great starting point. It's not like we're starting at zero. We got to get 50% of the population to agree with the idea. We're starting at 40%. And we haven't even really begun a campaign on a large scale. And so I think that the people recognize that. The establishment recognizes that. And I'm talking about the establishment Democrats, establishment Republicans. And that's who these people are. Those people who are writing these articles that are against national divorce. Now, someone like Sarah Silverman, for example, she's not an establishment Democrat. She's a Democrat, a liberal Democrat, but she's not an establishment Democrat. So she can go out there and say something off the cuff like that. That's what she believes, and she spoke, I guess, from her heart there. And from there, other people started, well, I'm thinking the same thing. So it's kind of one of those situations where it's like, Sarah Silverman just said what everyone else is thinking. And now everyone else feels more comfortable saying it too, because they're not the only ones. Because as we know, you go out there by yourself and start talking about secession or now national divorce, kind of maybe sound like you're a little crazy or an extremist or something like that. Well, now Sarah Silverman, a famous comedian, up there talking about it. And other people followed her and said, something positive about it as well. So now there's some cover. And that's why that flood of positivity and comments and national discussion ensued, because people felt more comfortable saying that they support it too. And that's why now we see this deluge of negativity to try to bring that down, calm people down, because it could very quickly go, snowball effect downhill real fast and actually make it happen.
Let's show everybody that. So one more time. National divorce, so stupid. October 2021. National divorce, so dumb. Wow, how dumb. October 2021. National divorce, so stupid. October 2021. Calexit, so stupid. February 2017. Calexit, so stupid. January 2017. Calexit, so stupid. March 2017. So,
Terrible.
I mean, why is it that Calexit, right when we got big, here's all these articles, it's the dumbest thing ever. Why is it national divorce the dumbest thing ever? How come they didn't say that last year, a month ago? Why are they saying that now? How come it appears on both left and right and center publications? And why are they all coming to the same conclusion? And why at the same exact point? And why almost in a coordinated attack? And why does it exactly mirror what happened to us 3.5 to 3.4 years ago?
3.5 to 3.4?
A lot of coffee. Sorry.
3.4 years ago it happened to us.
I'm just saying, like, there's clearly a pattern of you get big and then it's like, no, this is the dumbest thing. And they need to have everybody come out and go, this is so stupid and dumb. And they did that because we got big. And here's national divorce, same thing. And they're doing the same thing. And I think it backs up what Gandhi said. You know, they ignore you, then they laugh, and then they attack. And then you win. So national divorce is at the attack and win stage, just as we were.
Yeah. Well, I got to go in a minute, but Czechoslovakia started this, and I think it was like around 1989. And by January 1st, 1993, they were two separate countries. And I think that we could work in that type of time frame as well. So by 2030, for sure, we could have this all worked out.
Awesome. Adam Kokesh, last minute thoughts. Lewis, I know you got to go whenever, and then we'll go to Jason.
Just loving everything I'm hearing.
Okay.
All right, guys, I got to go.
All right.
So I will see you next week, and you may see me in the meantime because I'm doing my new California Secessionist episodes. 2. I've already done 2 of them. And,
I am announcing today I'm going to be the nationalist. If you're the secessionist, I'm going to be the nationalist. So I'm going to start framing myself as the California nationalist. Yeah.
California nationalist. Okay.
So we'll spin off of it. You know.
Okay, very good. And also, Marcus, if you can encourage the members to participate in our new blog, we need writers.
Oh, yes. We need
Contribute to
blog
our-
writers. If you want to write on anything, we need blog writers. Please write articles. I will get that out to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be as long as it's somehow connected to what we're talking about. You know, we don't want to write an article about, you know, some off the topic thing, you know, animal rights without some connection to, you know, national divorce, California independence, self-determination, something like that. But if you can connect animal rights to self-determination, I'd be very interested to see the connections.
Yeah,
So
send it to
write
me,
up
send it
and
to
send
me.
it to us.
And anybody can write. So all of your SCA members, if you're in the Congress or if you believe in secession, just send it to us. We want to start getting smart stuff up.
Yeah.
So start writing, start sending it in.
All right, guys, I gotta go. I'll see you later, and if not, maybe you'll see me on the stream with the new episodes of the California Secessionist. I'm gonna be going through some of these articles about national divorce and singling out its authors one by one, and then going on to some other things. So we talk about the upcoming governor race, which reminds me, coming back in less than 150 days, back on the ground, travel in the state of California, talking about national divorce in person. Maybe we can organize some kind of event near the Los Angeles airport in the beginning of March or late February. Put it in the
You
back.
heard it here. He's coming back, running for the 2022 election as the leader of the world's 5th largest economy, and you can see him in March.
Yeah, we'll make a big deal about it. Okay, guys, I'll see you later.
We
Nice
gotta
talking.
like have lunch or something.
Well, yeah, we're definitely going to be meeting up and traveling around, so we'll cross
It's going to be
paths.
like the good old days. Lewis and I staying in hotels, traveling everywhere, so I'm ready. All right, looking forward to sharing a bed with you again in a platonic way as activists. That's
We
a
always
joke.
had, just to clarify, we always had the two separate beds, in between which was at least 2 lamps in which I put my candy bars and apple juice.
We shared a bed once, but we put a bunch of junk between the two of us.
I don't remember that, but okay.
Yeah, okay. Now, I know you were very sleepy that day. I counted on it.
Okay.
Joking. I'm joking. Yeah, Lewis is a father and he's got a great wife and all that stuff. So we're just playing around, screwing around, guys. Okay, just messing around. So, all right, Jason.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
All right, Jason. Last 5 minutes of the show. Summarize, inspire us, and then we'll take it out. Jason, last 5 minutes. Walk us out. What did we see here today? What's important? What do we need to remember from today, in your opinion?
Well, I would say this is the most important discussion that we can be having right now. And we just had it We brought up a lot of the, for lack of a better term, counter argument, the points that people try to make when trying to find a reason to not support independence. But we just dismantled all of them here in like 2 hours. We didn't cover all of the talking points. I think maybe my first thing that I write for the blog is going to be on what California independence can mean for world hunger. That's one of my personal, big things. Like, that's one of the things that is kind of responsible for having brought me around to independence in the first place. When I realized America, and I heard Lewis had even kind of hinted on it. He brought it up at one point that, well, who would you trade with, they say. Well, who are you thinking of? That's not California going around having trade wars, and that's America, and California suffers because of it. And because a lot of our goods are unable to get out onto the world market, a lot of the world suffers for it too. More than just the country or countries that are being sanctioned. So I think I'm, and Lewis sets a hard goal for someone as long-winded as an ent, such as myself.
We love you.
500 to 1,000 words. I'll try. I will try. Pardon me if it's a bit longer. I promise I will not make a book out of it, though I probably could. It brings up the next point of every single facet. It's a gemstone, right? Every single facet has its own depth, has its own shine, its own shimmer, its own clarity, its own flaws. So we can all, as Californians, come together to really solve these complex issues, really refine our gemstone. Or we can continue on just kind of, doing the ostrich, burying our heads in the sand or whatever, which from what I hear is not actually a thing. I hear
don't get distracted, because keep going. You're on fire. Let's just stay on topic.
We could just keep going the route that we're going and, continue watching this spiral and, just looking on in horror like a train wreck, right? Like, you don't want to see that gruesome sight, but it's something that, rarely ever occurs, let alone something you'll see. And once you've seen it, you just can't pull your eyes away, right? We've been in that cycle while the vortex pulls us down further. And, at one point, not too long ago, I could say that as a relatively poor person, monetarily, wealth-wise.
Thank you.
I like to consider myself a high caliber when it comes to my quality of being.
I've told you are worth $120,000 if you were paid what your actually skill levels at. So yes, please continue.
Well, thank you, sir.
I don't give compliments.
So, as a relatively poor person monetarily, I used to be able to say not that long ago that I was a minority. But given the current health situation, crisis, call it what you will, the thing that shall not be named.
Thank you.
Mainly just out of fear. Right?
Thank you.
I do agree, and so I do operate by it, but I also must point out that we only really do it out of fear, folks.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that little digression aside, given everything that's happened, so many millions and millions and millions of people, a lot of whom are in California, but also all over the United States, totally hard up, wondering if they're going to survive. So the difference between thrive and survive is, one, you're doing great. You have enough room for your roots to grow. You are going to grow as big as you possibly can. That's thriving. Surviving is just barely scraping by. If things get any worse, you might not survive, i.e., death. This is the very real situation folks like myself struggle with every single day, all through the night. When I cook, I have to wonder, okay, so this is going to make this much, and I can portion that out to have this much over this much time. Maybe I could stretch it a little further. Why am I, 35 pounds underweight? Well, it's not for lack of appetite, I tell you that. And while struggling with all of this, the prices continue to skyrocket.
Go up. Yeah.
What you, like, literally last month, what I spent, because I will openly admit I get food stamps. It's like the only thing keeping me alive.
There's nothing to be apologizing for at all. You're a smart man, and the economy is failing you as it did for so many people that we've shown.
Yeah. And so what I spent last month, just last month, got me twice what it got me this month. So, if the trend continues, I'm very worried. I try not to live in fear. I try not to, just dwell on, this is bad and that's going down. I try to, be mindful while continuing forward. But I'm starting to wonder how much longer I might, as well as so many millions of other people, might be willing and, able. Because, at a certain point, there is a hands up, lay down and die, just, F it all kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
And everyone has a different limit. Everyone has their breaking point, though. And it's coming to reality that, like I know this firsthand because this has been my reality since before this current, medical situation kicked off. Not too long before, but just, it was before. Now, a lot of these folks that are falling into this right now have little to no experience with having to live like this, having to portion out meals when you're underweight, right? Portion it out into multiple meals.
Jason, let's get back on topic, bro.
So yeah, okay. So, you know, the economic and agricultural value of independence shows that California commodities would actually be much more readily available, thereby putting the price somewhere more reasonable. Still fair for the product, right? Not saying that it's going to drop the prices down so low farmers are going to go out of business. What I'm saying is dropping them from a like 1,500% markup down to something that's reasonable for everyone, where the farmer still has the vested interest to go ahead and be a farmer because it's profitable, and the consumer can still go ahead and purchase and consume because it's affordable and attainable. And part of, you know, they go hand in hand. It has to be attainable to be affordable. So
Okay.
it all comes back to California can only do such a thing if California controls itself without interference from the federal government, which is called autonomy, self-determination, independence, secession, call it what you will.
Yep. I mean, what I love is the fact that, you know, so we always talk about how this benefits rich people and businesses, you know, less regulations, better tax use. But I love talking about people who are living, you know, regular folks and how this affects them. And here you are, somebody who's living on the margins, who loves California still and is talking about why this is still a good idea.
Yeah, you know, California has vast potential. We don't harness our full potential, nowhere near it. It's kind of like what they say about the human brain. We only use a small percentage of it, like actually use it. California's been like that for at least as long as I've been alive. And when I look at numbers, I can see really for a very long time, California has not, I don't know if California really truly has ever fully utilized itself the way that it could. And I see our potential. I recognize it. I see our faults and our failures, our shortcomings. But I see that potential, and I know all of those faults and shortcomings, they are not but a drop in the bucket when compared to what the outcome could be.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Other last minute thoughts. What else should people think about? What should they take away our conversation today? What is something you want to incept into their head so that the next 6 to 17 days they can't get that thought out of them? And it's a perfect encapsulation and boiled downness of, that's not even a word, boiled down. What do we talk about that's super great today? And what is the thought that people need to have? Last 2 minutes, how do you get that idea into the head? What are the things they can't stop thinking about based upon what we talked about today? Real fancy talk.
The concentration. Yes, I would say when Lewis brought up the fact that folks like myself have no actual representation in California's political upper circles, right? He is very correct, and I could not agree more. And I go back as someone who studied a lot of the American history stuff, and like, you know, all my secession talk, it sounds like I may hate America or something, but I actually am much more American than most Americans. and that's why I love California so much. I know more of American history than most Americans. I remember that the founding fathers originally, you know, the ones who were considered the great minds, not just the rest of the group that like finally added their signatures, but the people who came together kind of like our Calexit Congress, right? And formulated the drafts and ultimately the final version of like the Declaration of Independence. Right? What they wanted was a social democracy, a society with democratic value, so that it, you know, represents the society. It's like the vortex of the donut in space, right? Like it just continually forever loops through itself back over again. It's like that. Now, America has two current voting bills going up. One is good. One is good if you're a corporate Democrat. The one that's good is the John Lewis bill, right? All you need to know, just think great civil rights leader John Lewis. And it's not just good just because it's got his name. I'm just saying that's how you can remember which one is the good one. It's got John Lewis's name in it. The other one is like the Freedom to Vote Act or something like that, which sounds great, which is how they always do it, right? The Patriot Act. Let's strip those freedoms.
Okay, 2 more minutes, bro. Really? Okay,
so the Freedom to Vote. The Freedom to Vote Act.
It's so hard to have a serious face on messed up stuff, and then you make some joke, and I'm like, I just come unglued. I'm like, you know, because I was trying to, yes, serious. Oh my God, what did he say? Like, bro, you're too funny sometimes, man.
So the Freedom to Vote Act is going to pretty much destroy third parties in America. You will either, no matter how you vote, your vote will either go to one polarizing party or the other. It will no longer be a question of anyone pulling votes away from the Dems so that the Republicans win, or pulling the votes away from the Republicans so those dirty Dems win, right? I'm on the page of screw both of them, because they're both really in favor of the ultimate outcome that this would achieve, no matter what they might go around and puppet out for the media. Ultimately, the destruction of the third parties and the middle ground, it's them basically, it's like the manifest destiny thing that happened in America, where people landed and they said, okay, just keep on going until you can't go anymore and claim all of that. Like, we got to claim it before someone else does. You know, let's gobble up this last little bit and see who comes out on top. That never really works well for the people who are getting gobbled up, which is, you know, pretty much anyone who's not pro-polarizing, you know, politics. Pro-polarizing politics. Try and say that 3 times. So yeah, you know, think about the 2 voting bills going up. One is good, John Lewis. The other one is the imminent destruction of all that is actually maintaining the semblance of democracy in America. All the freedom to vote, or whatever it is. So pay attention to that. And if they jump and pass it through, just keep it in your mind what this really means and what it means went on behind the scenes, what their attitudes would have had to have been in order to pass such a monstrous idea. I mean, if you value democracy, destroying all but the pullers would be monstrous. Like, it's very much anti-democratic. Like, it's against democratic process. And the founding fathers were very clear. It is to be an anything more than two-party system. So it would literally be the destruction of America as the founding fathers made it. At least the last timber holding it up.
Okay. All right. Well, that's going to be it for us. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We'll take it from there. All right. That'll be the end of our show. Appreciate it, everybody. Let's go here. And yes, Mike, I see you. I will stick around.